Good evening, everybody. I'm Jacob Winograd. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, and I'm joined by the comedian who finally can be named by Ben Shapiro and all of the usual suspects, Zionists and neocons and warhawks, Dave Smith. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, of course. I was kind of happy. 'Cause I remember texting you the day that Ben Shapiro finally said your name. I was like, dude, Dave's gonna be he's gonna be so happy. He's not gonna know what to do with himself. But I was also sad because I had had this running bit of just collecting all of the receipts of every time Ben and people would just be like, and this right-wing comedian, this libertarian dude, and
Yeah.
not saying your name. So the bit's dead, but your platform has risen, and yet I do appreciate that you have taken the time to come down and once again air your grievances with the libertarian inside baseball drama. Uh, you just can't help yourself sometimes. I understand.
Yeah, thank you for all that. It was a big moment when Ben Shapiro finally said mine. I feel like it was a big win for all of us in a way. But yeah, it's we were joking about this before, but I was like, I wanted to respond to some of this stuff. I've kind of been planning on responding to it for a few days now. I've had a very busy the last few days have been like the busiest days of my year because I just got back from my comedy festival, Skankfest.
After the busiest year of your life.
After the busiest year of my life, this was the busiest week of that year. So I was just at this all-day festival every, for the last few days. So, but I wanted to kind of respond to some of this stuff, but then I'm in this weird position where I'm like, well, look, there's, if I wanted to talk about some of the stuff on my podcast, I'd have to spend like 2 hours giving the audience the backstory on what any of this is so that they'd understand what I was saying for them to ultimately not really care about what I'm saying. And so you're like, oh, that's not really an option. Even if I were to like post it on Twitter or something, it'd be like, most of the people wouldn't, So like, I was like, weirdly, now I'm like, hey, can someone give me a platform? Like, hey, Jacob, can you platform my toxic ideas, please?
Well, and
I'm glad I have friends in high places.
There's a weird irony because it's almost like Groundhog Day because we're back almost 2 years later in a weird way having the same conversation we had 2 years ago. Just like and weird clips from that episode have been cropping up and going viral again, which is, the first time that's happened to me. I know that happens to you all the time, but like when people have to go back into the vault to try to find something to stir controversy up on. But yeah, no, I'm happy to have you on. We have a lot to talk about tonight, and I guess we'll start with the video that been circulating. Part of the issue here is that you're in two different worlds now, Dave, and I have to remind myself of that sometimes because like I remember when we were just like hanging out at Libertarian Party conventions, and you were like just a big fish in the little pond of the Liberty movement, and now you're at a whole different level. So like you have like your big audience and you go on these big stages, and yet then it's kind of little in comparison to what you're doing, right? You're going on Candace Owens and Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan and all that. But for us libertarians down here, anytime it's just like a little video gets released like this, it's a big deal to us, right? Because we're libertarians. We're gonna debate each other over ideas and philosophy because we have to live up to that reputation. So it was a big deal in our circles and stuff. This video that Liquid Zulu, who's a YouTuber, libertarian ANCAP, released criticizing. It was kind of a mixture of a criticism of you, the Mises Caucus, and what he calls like neo-pragmatism, a whole mixture of different things. I, of course, kind of covered it and on my show earlier last week, kind of gave the spots where I thought, hey, here's some decent points, other spots where I think he was wrong. But a lot of it was directed at you, and you watched parts of it. And I know you have some things you want to talk about, and I'm sure we'll do some back and forth then. So I'll hand it over to you wherever you want to go with that.
Okay, sure. So, I mean, I guess I saw that he had put the video out around when that happened. And then I guess what got it on my radar was really that I think you and Jose Gallison
Yeah.
And there's another Zach, whose last name I'm blanking on, but he's another Twitter account who I don't know him personally, but like we've messaged back and forth over the years, and I really like him. And he's like disagreed with me on some things I think at times, but he's also been really fair and cool to me. So like I kind of like him. And I'd seen a few of you guys like kind of say things along the lines of like, oh, there's some interesting points that have been raised here. And then I saw, God, I'm trying to like recount all of this. So then Adam Heyman wrote a piece about it, and I'd seen that. I was kind of like debating whether or not to respond to any of this. And then I saw that Dan Sanchez had a debate about the topic on your show, and then there was the thing with the Libertarian Party like put out the video, and I did see that a bunch of people tagged me in it, that they had put out a video about him. And then I got a text message, I won't even say it from someone in the Libertarian Party who was like, dude, I'm so sorry that video was out. I just deleted it. And I was like, I wouldn't have told you to delete it, but okay, fine, like whatever. And I guess at a certain point, I was like, well, I guess I should weigh in on this since the whole conversation is about me. And it has made it to me. Like I watched a little bit of the video, and I talked to you about it. I talked to Jose about it. So like, okay, I guess I should respond. And I guess I would say there's been something that I have enjoyed. There's like an amusing nature about the whole thing, which has kind of been fun. And I guess, so I'd say this before getting into like what I watched of the video, and I'll give my thoughts on it. There is something where, you know, Jacob, like you said, look, I've been doing a lot of these like real big shows lately, and I hope I've been, you know, doing a good job for like, I hope the libertarian hardcores, at least some of them, would appreciate some of the stuff I've been doing or how I've been able to move the needle on this or that issue or whatever. But there is, I don't know, I guess there was something to me like if we were doing this show 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, like if we were doing this like when we had first launched the Mises Caucus, you know, takeover,
Yeah.
and someone was like arguing against our strategy, I just think I would have had a much different attitude about the whole thing. And probably because of the kind of disrespectful nature of a lot of it, I'd have been like, all right, I'm going to go destroy this guy now. Like, set bait, let's go do it. But the thing is that now, well, really, there's two factors. Number one is that I'm not fighting over the future of the Libertarian Party. I don't know what even the fight is about. I don't know when people say like, I think Dave Smith is bad for the liberty movement or something. I'm like, what movement are you a part of that I'm a part of? What movement do you have when you separate yourself from me that you don't have now? Like, all right. I don't know what the fight's about. And then number two, I just I have real enemies now.
Yeah.
Like I have legit enemies in powerful places, like very powerful people who really want to like ruin me and for bad things to happen to me. And so I just don't I don't have the same energy. I don't know. All right. You know, I think like while obviously there's a disrespectful tone to, I think, a lot of this discussion toward me, and that does, you know, I'm a human. Jose Gallison, I think, accused me of being a little emotional, although I think he acknowledged he was a little emotional too at points here. But like, I don't know, I don't really agree with him on that. I think we're all humans, and like there, I think I've probably earned a level of respect in this world that maybe the discourse hasn't been giving me, but you know, I'm trapped behind my two eyes and I live life as me. So maybe that's just my perspective.
Well, if I can touch on that real quick, I think part of the issue, kind of as I alluded to, is somewhat of the disconnect between what we're almost like the foot soldiers in the liberty movement, right? And you're like this, like, I don't know, like you're not even a general. You're like the only references coming to my head are like Dragon Ball Z and anime Star Wars, like Avengers, like you know what I mean. You're like you're out there on the front lines fighting these heavyweight battles, and so sometimes for us we're like covering you like a national phenomenon, but at the same time it's like you're still a person. But you're like,
well,
and
look,
so
look,
you're a
I don't
person.
even.
Anyway, go ahead.
Well, look, I'm just saying, I appreciate all but I'm not even I'm not like any better than any of you guys or any, like, it doesn't matter. Zulu, I don't know how old he is, but he's quite possibly further ahead than me at his age than I was at his age, like maybe he'll be bigger than me, or maybe any of you guys will be, I don't know. That doesn't even really matter. I guess the point to me is more that, like, I'm watching a debate, Jacob. Imagine this, like, look, the topic of conversation is me, which is already a little bit weird. And then it's a little bit weird for, like, at first you're kind of like, well, I shouldn't really be the one debating me. Maybe someone else should. But then you watch someone else do it and you're like, well, I guess I should say something because I am me. But I'm watching, and I didn't get through the whole thing. Not that, I'm sure it was a good debate. I just, like, it's a little uncomfortable to watch a thing about you. And also I was just very busy. But so there's like a debate on your show that you're moderating about, like, essentially, am I a cancer to this movement or not? Meanwhile, just imagine this from my perspective, Jacob. Like, I'm the one who introduced libertarianism to you.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, and I'm, by the way, I'm not like taking credit for that. I probably made a good point or two that made you like, oh, let me go read some people, and then some smarter people than me, like, actually converted you. But it's still just like, maybe 50% of the audience here is like something to do with me introducing it. And I mean, who has done more, like, to promote kind of the libertarian podcast guys? And so you would think, like, if a conversation broke out amongst the libertarian podcast guys, there'd at least be some level of, like, well, look, we got to give them credit for this, or hey, look, he is out here collecting scalps against 25 of the most, like, prominent fucking guys and on hardcore libertarian issues, and he's moving the needle on COVID and on Ukraine and on Gaza or whatever. But okay, again, I'm trapped behind my eyes, so that's just a bit of how I feel about it. But I will say this: I'm not coming at this like whatever. Zulu, like I don't know that much about him. He's been on my radar for a few years. I've known of him. I've mostly, and this is probably a comment on me and my narcissism, I think I've only seen the stuff he's made about me, or parts of the stuff he's made about me. But from what I understand, or from what I've seen, he's got a little rabid following of people who really like him. He makes YouTube videos about libertarianism, and I think he's had some videos about like Austrian economics and stuff, shit that I probably really, really agree with. And he's probably gotten them, like, I think he's had some videos that have done well and gotten some views on them. And shit, man, I respect that. If I'm being completely honest, like, I think that's cool. I bet he's reached some people who I wasn't able to reach, introduced them to some good ideas that I probably really agree with. So it's not really like, dude, I'm out here worried about, like, real threats. So I'm not trying to take him out. I'm good for him. Keep doing it. I hope guys like that, I hope they keep an open mind about some of this stuff. And I think that maybe they could actually even, get better and more effective. But I hope he reaches a whole lot of people with the messages that we both agree on. And so anyway, I guess I would start with that it's not, despite the disrespectful nature of this whole thing, and despite the fact that I feel like, maybe there's a different way to talk about me or to me. But that being said, I like it. And I will say, it was kind of amusing to me, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then we could take on, like, substantive things. But it was kind of amusing to me, like, just the showmanship of all of it. And I thought I was kind of playing into that when the guy from the Libertarian Party was like, oh, don't worry, we deleted the video. And I was like, dude, you didn't have, like, all right, that's fine. And I go, maybe I should just post the video. And then I was like, maybe I should just post the video and then delete the video. And I was kind of having fun with that. I thought some of them were kind of having fun with, like, the ZZ, we set Liberty Twitter on fire stuff.
Right.
And I did, it was particularly amusing to me because in the last week, so in the week that this all came out, I had Tucker Carlson was on my show. It was the first show where he addressed the controversy over interviewing Nick Fuentes or whatever. So he was on my show. It was a big show. And then Candace was on my show, and that was a even bigger show. And then I did the show with Clint Russell, whose show is, like, blowing up right now, with him and Ian Carroll. and then I did trigonometry. And so I was like, every single one of those shows had generated like 5 controversial clips so I'm getting fire from every angle. Like the Zionists are mad at me, and then the Groypers are mad at me, and then the fucking this and that. And then
Well,
all these,
yeah, and there's kind
but
of
then
something
in
weird
the
about
middle
you.
of that, in the
Yeah.
middle of all of that, there'd be like some tweet about the controversy, and then there would just be some libertarian who'd be like, ZZ is inevitable. And like I would be like, all right, that is pretty hilarious.
Yeah.
So like I'd be lying if I said I didn't kind of enjoy the fun of all of this.
Well, yeah. So like after we covered because we talked about Zulu's video on public property back when you were on my show almost 2
Mm-hmm.
years ago, and that was
That
kind
was
of the
the
only
first
thing
video of his I
Zulu.
ever watched. Yeah.
Right, and I just thought, like we talked about back then, and I've talked to Zulu on his show about this since then, and I maybe understand a little bit more where he's coming from, but still pretty much agree with you that I think it's wrong to view public property as defaulting to unowned and just letting anyone on it. And I think it's kind of all we talked about. But then the more I looked into him, he was what is it called? The Hazlitt Fellowship with Fee. He went through that, and yeah, he's got really good videos on Austrian economics. He did like like the how was a pencil made. He basically did that, but with the iPhone, and it's really high quality.
Oh,
It's got a
cool.
lot of views on YouTube, and he's actually good at explaining the non-aggression principle and anarcho-capitalist, and so like all that stuff is like. I think he does do a good job at explaining the principles, and he's kind of capturing a lot of like the sort of the Zoomer, maybe younger millennial, like humor and energy and sort of like memery. So it's like even
Yeah.
when I
Well,
disagree with
good.
him, there's
Well,
stuff
right,
that there
right.
that I'm like, it's funny. It is playing into culture. And I think like there's a role for that in the liberty movement. But then I was like, when I was doing the coverage of the video and doing that hosting that debate, I was just like, hey, Zulu, what's funny is that I've watched some of your content and I really like it. And I've learned some things from it. Do you know that if it weren't for Dave Smith, I would have never discovered you or your content? So there's just something a little
Well,
silly here about
as
moderating a debate about like you're saying that you're right and that Dave's wrong and that he's poisoning
well, look,
libertarianism. But anyway, so
no,
like
no,
on one hand, I'm
just because
happy.
you brought up that point though, because it almost like I would have rather just gotten into some of the stuff that I saw from the video, but since you made that point, because I think it's really important to say, right, and this is this is one of my issues that I have with a lot of these what I just don't know what other word to call them, but like theory bros or something like that, like the people who I would view as ideologically captured, who would view me as like a sellout of who deviates from libertarian principles or something like that. Like I'm just trying to describe this as best I can. But one of the things that they do, and I've had this has been very interesting. I've noticed this pattern for a long time in libertarianism, is that they first of all they present themselves as just the purest adherence to the irrefutable logical chain of principles. Like that's what I am, and you're deviating from that. And there is obvious certainty to all of this. Unified theory of everything and morality and how you can deduce from first principles everything that ought to be known. But then they sneak in their strategy ideas and they act like it's all the same thing. And like when very clearly actually theory and strategy are two clearly distinct things. Like obviously you have your theory of like what is morally correct or whatever, and then you go, okay, we know that and we live in this world. How do we get from where we are now to implementing these things? But they sneak in the strategy as if it's all part of the theory. So there'll be things like, me and Michael Malice used to make fun of this all the time. And Michael Malice is like a real big Ayn Rand, fan. But used to always, after in 64, after the presidential election, when LBJ destroyed Barry Goldwater and like a huge blowout, I think the second biggest blowout in modern presidential races or something. And Ayn Rand goes, the reason that Barry Goldwater lost is because he didn't fully subscribe to objectivist philosophy. And there were philosophical inconsistencies in his argument. And that's why he couldn't win. Now, that is such a wildly out of touch assertion when he was the most philosophically consistent candidate. And no one seemed to be moved by that at all. You know what I mean? But like, it's just like, really, you're just asserting as if it is a given that philosophical consistency is what moves the average person. So anyway, there's just a lot of that comes out where it'll be like, hey, even if somebody is great on these three big issues and has moved people totally in our direction, and even in this case, if you're talking about someone who's gotten probably more people reading Rothbard and Hoppe and Mises and more people engaging in this world and thinking about these ideas than anyone else, you still come up with a thing where like, no, but he's creating faux libertarians and therefore he's a net negative, when like, anyway, I guess they slip a lot of this kind of like these ideas about strategy in with being the most virtuous, consistent libertarian that I don't think are actually have ever
Well,
actually been well argued for.
so I kind of get your point. There's something there, which I guess this will get into one of the things in the video, though I don't know if it's one of the parts you watched, but where I thought he had half a point because it did resonate with something that you talked about and we talked about in the Mises caucus all the time, which was that like the Gary Johnson campaign was held up as this gold standard of like, what we have to do to win elections and grow the party and grow the movement. But like when you debated Nicholas Sarwark, rest in peace, and we're having the, conversation about like, and he's like, we have to get like 1 million votes. And you're like, or 100,000, I don't know. And you were just like, we're never going to get those votes, unless we convert people first. And
Sure.
Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, yeah, maybe they got a lot of votes and maybe some people joined the party, but how many of those people stuck around long term? Now, I've met a few. I'm not saying they don't exist, but I think as evidenced by the Mises Caucus takeover, it clearly wasn't like this huge influx of like committed, suddenly like ideological libertarians that were like, ready to go to battle for liberty. They were, kind of like lukewarm, fair weather, probably like centrists or disenfranchised Republicans or maybe some Democrats who just really didn't like Trump or Hillary and so voted libertarian. They didn't. So maybe you made libertarians in name only for like a short cycle, but they kind of uh went away after that. So I
Okay, so
I get the idea that you or a presidential candidate can kind of do this, but I also think that like these things aren't sort of like happening in isolation because even if you have like a bad libertarian candidate, and like I did this with Chase Oliver, even though I didn't like him and I didn't support him for the LP ticket. But when people would come and be like, oh, what are the libertarians saying? Or they would see something at Chase Oliver and then talk to me about it, I'd point out where he was right, point out where he was wrong, and like you can do that with anybody. And I don't understand why Zulu and his crowd can't just say with Dave, "Hey, he's good on like, these 4 or 5 really important things, and we think he's wrong on like immigration and maybe we disagree on some of the like philosophical, framings and presuppositions and things like that." But you're still like you're bringing in so many people who are just now interested in learning about libertarianism.
well,
So I think that anyway, go ahead.
well, look, I mean, if you're going to ask like why is it that they say that, then like I don't exactly know why they act the way they do, but I would say that there's probably a mix of several things going on. I mean, one of them is a real, a very tough case of ideological possession, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but like that is a huge part of this. Another part of it is that there's emotional feelings on their end, and I think that they let's
You
just
did
say a
call them
lot.
commies.
Well, yes, that's right, and they got upset about that, and that really bothered them. And like, look, I'm just as I kind of indicated earlier, I'm at a little bit of a different place in my career, in my life. I don't, like I said, I'll give Zulu credit for what he's good at. I'll give these other guys credit for where they move the needle in the right direction. I don't care really if they give me credit for where I move the needle in the right direction or not. I don't. I see some of these guys, like the married couple and the unhinged things that they've been saying about me, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, guys, I don't like. This has not been an issue for me for years. It clearly still is for you. I don't care, like I'm kind of, but I think that a lot of them were very hurt by that. But at the same time, like, I don't know, guys, like, Like even the other day on my show on when I had Tucker Carlson on my show, it was one of my biggest shows, and I gave Alex Berenson props for being so good on COVID, and he's been goddamn vicious to me. Like he's called me a Holocaust denier and all types of
He
horrible
was going
things.
after you today.
Like, yeah, he was going after me today, and I still was even trying to just be nice. So like, I don't know. Like, did you get your feelings hurt when I said that? Well, okay. Too bad. What do you care about? Do you care about your feelings being hurt, or do you care about this movement? Do you care about these issues? Because like I'm moving the needle on a lot of these important issues. And if that hurt your feelings, well, you know what? I don't regret what I said. I didn't say anything wrong, and I'll defend it here today. So we'll get to all that in a second. But let me just tell you the point you asked. Okay. So this is the truth. I watched 15 to 20 minutes of the 3.5 hour video that was made about me being a celebritarian or whatever, which is like, I don't think really is the word to describe me, but okay, fine. In fact, I think whatever. Okay. So I'll comment on that. If there were real good points made after that, then you let me know. And I don't know. I haven't seen that. I'll be humble enough to admit that maybe there were really, really good points made after that I haven't seen. But let me just go through the first like 20-ish minutes or so and just tear apart how ridiculous the whole thing was. I mean, like, this is why I couldn't make it through the rest. I'm a real narcissist, and it's about me. And I still was just like, dude, I'm bored. Because, like, the whole first 20 minutes, he goes through this thing where he's breaking down the philosophy of pragmatism and Cartesian pragmatism, and where Descartes parted from his starting point of I think therefore I am to coming out, and he's going through this whole like thing about like the flawed philosophy that is pragmatism. But he's just setting up this giant bait and switch. I didn't finish the whole thing, but I saw that Dan brought this up on the debate. I don't know. Yep. I don't know if he pressed him about it more later, but the obvious bait and switch is that everything he's talking about there, which he then will refer back to, he's clearly setting up that this is like what he's going to refer back to as pragmatism. So this is what the Prag caucus means, and this is what Dave means anytime he says, let's be pragmatic or whatever. But the problem, obviously, there, Jacob, is that whole anything Descartes, that has nothing to do with what the caucus was, and that has nothing to do with what any of this is. Every time a libertarian has ever said, I'm a pragmatist, they're just saying be pragmatic. The word that just essentially means got to be realistic, dude. Like, and who can argue against that? Who can argue that we're not supposed to be realistic? And like, I don't know. Obviously, look, I was not a member of the Prague caucus, and we had a lot of criticisms of them. But who could argue, Jacob, that if our view is that we believe in anarcho-capitalism and we're alive today, they're like, okay, well, what are you going to do? Sure does seem like you'd need to be pragmatic at some point. And so this whole thing is like a gigantic bait and switch straw man that's, for some reason, I spent like at least the first 15 minutes of the video are on that. And so then he cuts to me at the Soho Forum. And this is where I got to say, I think the kid was pretty dishonest throughout this thing. And I don't know much more than this, but so he cuts to me at the Soho Forum. And he cuts to me saying, and this is getting into your point that you were asking about, but he cuts to me saying, hey, we will never win 70 million votes unless we convert another million people and then another million people after that. That's our only way. But what's interesting is that he started the video there instead of starting it 20 seconds earlier, where if he had, it would have been very clear what, and by the way, this debate is fairly well known in libertarian circles at this point. And what I said was, I start by going, hey, I was listening to the Reason Magazine podcast where Matt Welsh is interviewing Bill Weld about whether he's going to be the candidate next year or next presidential cycle. And he goes, there's this divide in libertarianism between the people who say that we want to win 1 million new converts and the people who say we want to win 70 million votes. But you're more of the pragmatist who thinks we could win 70 million votes. And then I go, yeah, that's pragmatic. Right. The idea that Bill Weld could win 70 million votes. And then I explicitly say there is no conflict between whether we should be pragmatic and win 70 million votes or whether we should convert another million libertarians. The point is that We will only win 70 million votes if we convert. And like you said, if we get the votes without converting anyone, then what have we really won? Nothing. So when you take the whole statement, and I'm sorry, that is like, to me, like essentially a lie by omission to say that I was against, I was making the case for radical pragmatism. I wasn't making the case for radicalism against pragmatism. And of course, as I imagine someone like Zulu may have noticed if he was paying attention to this thing, I didn't just debate Nick Sarwark and then not talk about the Mises Caucus strategy ever again. I talked about this on maybe 100,000 different podcasts where I very clearly explained that our vision was radical pragmatism, that our vision was like, yes, look, it actually, I said this many different times. If let's say in 2016, Gary Johnson had won 32% of the vote and he needed 33% to win. We had come within 1 percentage point of winning the presidency with someone like Gary Johnson, who, yes, is not perfect, but is so much better than anyone else you're ever going to get as president. And then the next election cycle, the Prags were saying, hey, let's run Justin Amash this time. And then we came in and went, no, let's run Dave Smith. I'd be like, yes, they have a strong case because Jesus, dude, just do the same thing and try to get a little bit better. And we might make this situation much better than it is now. But that wasn't the situation. For all that compromise, you got 4% and none of them even stuck around in the party. So anyway, as I always said, as I'm sure I've said to you before, I guarantee me and you have had this conversation. I went, look, there is a form of radicalism that is stupid. And that radicalism looks like having an argument at the LP presidential debate about whether we should have driver's licenses. And then Michael Bednarik going, you know, what's next? A license to make toast in my own damn toaster? And then Gary Johnson goes, I mean, I'd like to see a little bit of competency demonstrated before someone gets out on the freeway.
And then he gets booed.
And now the entire libertarian audience looks at him like, what a sellout. You're not hardcore enough. But every regular person who's ever existed goes, what are they even talking about? Like, this is insane. So that's radical, but it's also stupid. And now, by the way, even if you were running like an ANCAP campaign, you wouldn't lead with that. And then maybe if you had explained anarchism or something like that, and then someone was like, so you're saying you wouldn't have driver's license? And then you could maybe go like, well, look, the road owners can decide what, you know, you have to have in order to drive that. Like, but there'd be a different way to explain. I'm saying there's a form of radicalism that is stupid and not pragmatic. There's also a different form that is, but just to be clear, there's never been any change here. I was never arguing that we ought not be pragmatic in our goals because that's stupid. And it has nothing to do with some philosophy that you think is based off circular reasoning, which I actually probably mostly agree with Zulu's take on the philosophy, but that's not what we're talking about here. And then, and this is where I got up to in the video, but this was the part that I was probably most offended by, is that then he says that because I've embraced pragmatism, I'm abandoning Ron Paul's strategy of speaking to the remnant. And then he plays like a clip or two of Ron Paul saying some great Ron Paul shit. One of them is a clip of him going, oh, building a fence. A fence might be used to keep all of us in. Which, by the way, Jacob, as you know, is something that I mentioned at the victory speech after, or the night before we won the entire Libertarian Party. Like, how great was it when Ron Paul said that? And I'd still give him credit for that. That's a real concern of having this government build a wall. Regardless, though, right? And again, this is a blatant lie of omission because you're creating, he's going, look, Ron Paul was against the wall. Ron Paul just said radical things, but like, what's being omitted there? What's being omitted is that Ron Paul rejected open borders, that Ron Paul ran like 15 races as a Republican, that Ron Paul endorsed Ronald Reagan for president. He endorsed Pat Buchanan for president. He voted for the AUMF in Afghanistan. He endorsed like all types of statist things that Zulu. So Zulu positions himself as if Ron Paul was this pure awesome model, Dave Smith selling out. in reality, objectively speaking, I'm not a better person than Ron Paul. I'm not smarter or well educated. I am a more radical libertarian than he was. And like, I was around in 2008 and 2012, and all I did was champion Ron Paul. If Zulu was around back then, he'd have been an ankle biter making a video about how he was a poison to the to the movement. And he was, you know what I mean? Like costing us more than he's helping. So like that. Okay, I made it about 20 minutes in and I went, this is all just too ridiculous, dude. Like I don't know. None of this makes any sense. And it's all based off like very intentional omissions and trickery. But again, that's only 20 minutes in. So I know that. And then I read what Adam Heyman said. And then I saw the clip going around and I saw a bit of Zulu defending that I was calling for violence which you could ask what you want to next, but at some point I do want to address that. But anything you want to say from that?
No, I think we should cover that next, but we can stay here for just a minute. I think that I would mostly agree with what you're saying. I think this gets into a tricky thing with language where words do have multiple meanings sometimes. And, maybe because of the philosophy, you could argue that you should use a different word. Like maybe you should say, instead of being pragmatic, we should be practical or realistic. I don't know.
Sure.
That seems to be a bit pedantic at the end of the day. I think that if you're just being good faith, like as he defines pragmatism in the video, which I agree with his definition. I think you would mostly agree. Like the philosophy says that, what is good is whatever works. And, even on issues.
No, but that's never been what any libertarian who calls themselves a prag has ever been
exactly.
talking about. And far be it from me, but far be it from me to defend the fucking prags. Like those guys hate my guts and I hate most of them, but I'm sorry. That's just not, they were never saying it's good. They were saying, hey, we're libertarians. That's our philosophy. Now let's see what can advance that. Now, they did it in all sorts of terrible ways, but that doesn't mean that the idea that you ever have to deal with reality is wrong. And that's all it means to be pragmatic. In the same way, if your dad ever told you to be pragmatic, he was never saying anything more than that.
Right.
So, no, it's not a circular philosophy when any libertarian talks about it.
Right. No, I agree. I mean, there's sort of like using the word in philosophy, and there's using the word in a more colloquial sense to talk about the way
every libertarian has ever meant it. Who's ever
really
said
just
it.
What most people mean when they use that word.
Again, listen, I'm not trying to be a dick. This is Archie Flowers saying you violated the non-aggression principle if you ever thought about anything that's impure in your head. It's like, okay, well, the way that every other person uses the word violated, they mean that, like it's on the level of if I went to you and I went, hey, going 70 in a 60 is against the law. And you went, okay. And then I went, well, thinking about going 70 in a 60 is also breaking the law. And you went, no, that's not breaking the law. And I went, well, it's breaking the law in the sense that you break the philosophical construct. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. But like, that's not the way anyone uses the word. So it's not even pedantic. It's just, you're using this term in a different way than any of the people you're arguing with are. So actually take on what they are saying.
I think
which is pretty easy. You're talking about Andy Craig and Nick Sarwark. We can deal with what they're actually saying. And none of it was this circular, dumb reasoning. They're just kind of sellouts and gay.
Yeah, Andy Craig, that's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Well, he was the Prague chair caucus, I think.
Yeah, no, you're right. So I think, and I don't know if I want to jump into this too soon because it is almost a really deep subject. Maybe we should save for later. It's just in terms of where maybe your and my philosophy differ from Zulu. But I think like he's trying to say that your position on immigration and public property and why you reject his position is philosophical pragmatism because you're rejecting sort of like being consistent in his, I'm using his, I'm not saying,
right,
I'm using his word. You're rejecting being consistent on the NAP because you say, well, we have to reject the consistency because the outcomes are too outrageous or evil or not desirable. And so he's saying that what you're doing is sort of like abandoning principle and saying like, no, we have to do like what works or something like that. And so I guess that's the strongest way I can try to steel man his argument, but I think, I mean, just to put it in my own words, why I kind of disagree with him on the public property thing is that it's not even just a matter of like, we would probably, if I put it this way, all agree on the public property thing. Because what I often say on this is like, and I was actually just having this discussion with LCI guys because we're writing a second edition to our flagship book, and we're talking about how to say this. And I was like, listen, sometimes the libertarian answer to a certain question is almost like there isn't one other than just privatize it, right? Like, what's the libertarian position on, what the, income tax rate should be? It's like, no, 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 there is no, we shouldn't have an income tax, right? We would probably agree on immigration that there is no libertarian position on what the state should do with immigration. It's like, no, we want to privatize movement to where it's regulated by market transactions and borders. And I think the same thing applies to public property, where it's like, well, what's the position on how government should run public property? It's like, well, we're ANCAPs. We don't want the government to own property and have it be this public good. But then what you're saying is, now, while they're doing this, what should we opt for? Right. And that's not you saying that that's like some kind of like philosophical normative thing. You're saying that we have to deal with the reality where, like, as much as we might philosophically disagree with the idea of public property, we live in a world with public property. So how are we going? And then, like, if our kids are being put into these public property facilities, should we just be like, well, it would violate the NAP to keep the kids away from from pedos?
Right.
So I guess so that's where I think it's like you're not saying really anything at those points about the philosophy. You're saying that, well, we have to be practical and deal with this real
Yeah.
world problem in front of us. Now,
So
but they say you're rejecting the philosophy, and I think
Well,
that's wrong.
in other words, it's a cop out, and it's a very intentional cop out to be like, well, pragmatism is this circular, self-contradictory philosophy, and therefore, anytime you say deal with real life, I get to have a get out of jail free card. It's like, yeah, okay, forget that circular philosophy. Nobody's arguing for that. Now, fine, pick a different word, Jacob. Be realistic here. What
Right.
can we actually do given the
Right.
world that we live in? And I will say that, like, while there's this mix of reactions because every libertarian is like arguing their own damn thing, I guess what I think I appreciate about Zulu, which again, that's what I just described is what I've seen of the video. But I did read Adam Heyman's piece that he wrote about it, and he had a quote from Zulu where, like, I guess there's a challenge to a debate, and the debate that he laid out is like, I'll bite the bullets. I'll say yes to all these things. And so there's something interesting about that. Number one, while these other people like refuse to bite the bullets, or though like that married couple, they'll bite them, then pretend they never bited them, then act like that wasn't what the whole argument was about. Look, the point I was making was something like a little bit more than that. Like, I would always say, and I would argue that I always use this example because there were a lot of libertarians who, when they discussed open borders, they would say, hey, it's just a peaceful man, a peaceful person, not violating the non-aggression principle, just crossing an imaginary border. And so it's immoral for someone to use force to stop them. And I was saying, okay, but if you believe that, and if you're going to take that energy into the debate, then you have to apply that across the board. And so that would mean that, like, a public school can no longer stop a random junkie from going into the fourth grade girls' elementary school bathroom or something like that. Now, the point of that example, Jacob, was always to get every reasonable person in the universe to go, well, obviously, we don't take it all the way to the end, right? But then you go, okay, so now we're talking about, like, how should we feel about this? Now, I do at least grant that, from what I understand, Zulu is not only biting that bullet, but biting it, like complete, that he will actually say, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I'm even adding on to his example, but I think, tell me if you think I'm misrepresenting this, dude, because you know him better than me, but I think you would have to take it all the way to the level that, like, you will have to allow your child, like, if your child is going to get raped and beaten and tortured to death in front of you, and you could stop it by stealing a penny, you cannot steal the penny. That would be immoral. That you have to sit there and not steal the penny and let it happen because You're violating the non-aggression principle. I think his exact example was that you have to let Martians blow up the entire world before you. So am I really adding that much
No,
to go? You have to
I
watch
had
now. Look, let me say a couple things on this, okay? Because I think this is actually kind of, I don't know. Look, number one, there is a certain level of like a view that you could take. And I understand that Zulu will be like, I'm afraid to debate him or something like that. Like, I guess I'm willing to do that if you want to, but like, that's the debate. You have to sit here. You think we're gonna have a debate? Like, what do you, Jacob? If I were to debate you on the idea that like, okay, the resolution is that God told me to murder you and your entire family. Let's have a debate on that. You want to debate that, or is that just so self-evidently ridiculous and wrong? And just also you're like, okay, so if that's true, then let's go to war. I don't know. Like, we're not debating anymore. Like, if you're gonna tell people, I mean, I don't know, 100% of serious people just will reject that. The idea that it's immoral to like steal a penny to save your child's life or something like that. And so this does now, look, even if you believe that, which is a tough place for me to put my mind in, but even if you believe that, do you really think the reason I won't debate that is because I'm so scared? Like, you can't possibly fathom that the reason I won't debate that is because it's so fundamentally unserious, and that actually I don't wish to shine a light on the fact that anyone in our movement actually would say something so ridiculous. Like,
well, and I just, you know what? Sorry, I don't mean to cut
sorry.
you off.
No, go ahead. There's another point I want to make, but go ahead.
Well, on one hand, and I don't say this to be derogatory or insulting, but like I think it's kind of unserious on the level that I don't think any of them would actually do that.
Right,
Like if
right.
their loved ones were actually like in danger and they had to do some small minuscule nap
But
violation to
like,
save their loved ones, it's just like I just so
so
that
like,
and
let me
yeah.
agree with you on that, but let me just say, yeah, I probably don't think that's right. It's all ideological. It's like cult shit. Like, none of you guys really believe this, but maybe I'll say that because that's the nicest thing I could say. But maybe, like, honestly, and I just want any serious person, even if you don't have kids, which, by the way, Zulu doesn't have kids. I have no way of knowing whether I'm right about that or not, Jacob, but I'm right about that, ain't I? Just like I called it with that other guy. Isn't it amazing how easy it is to tell when someone doesn't have kids? Because you don't. But even people who don't have kids, do you have property? Do you have a business? Do you have a good job? Do you have because like, if anybody else could think that possibly that is actually a workable worldview, to go that, like, if the slightest nap infringement could save a child from being tortured to death, you ought not do that. Like, that, it's just,
Well,
again,
it was
fundamentally
weird
unserious.
because I debated Zulu on this, and we literally got to the example of, like, letting the entire world blow up, and he said, "It's better to live a good life than a long life." And now on one hand, I was like, "Listen,
Oh, wow. What a deep insight. Yes. Yes.
as
Generally, all things being equal, maybe that's true. But when it means all the children of the world die, that's not true anymore. And I'm sorry, all you need to have is like the slightest bit of humility to go, like, let me question the actual, and like, look,
Well, let
here,
me let me just say something really quick to that, because as a Christian, there are figures in my religion that we venerate because they literally sacrificed their lives, even like their like the they abandoned their families in a sense, not like abandoned like in a bad way, but they had a choice to be maybe pragmatic in the face of like state oppression, or to say like we will not renounce the name of Christ. And they died.
right.
Not but like to me, I'm like, okay, on one hand, so when Zulu said that, I was like, well, there's something about that statement that on the surface I resonate with, but it's like I resonate on that for like really important decisions on like, would I uh yeah, like for my faith, right? Like I would not renounce, I mean, I hope I would have the courage. Like one of my favorite stories in the Bible is in the book of Daniel, Radshak, Meshach, and Abednego saying, "We won't bow down to Nebuchadnezzar," and getting thrown into the fire. I think everyone knows
Right.
that story, right? It's like I always hope I would have that kind of courage and that kind of faith. But that's different, right? That's like saying like I won't renounce God, not saying that I won't steal a penny. Like those are just two different things
And also, it was
entirely.
sacrificing yourself, not sacrificing all of the
Right.
world or all of your
Right.
children or
Exactly.
something like that.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just, and right. So it's fundamentally different. I will say this, and honestly, like, someone smarter than me could probably really put this in a better way, or like write a great article or something about this. But I noticed that there's this dynamic um amongst, so like I see this amongst the theory bros and the people who like will constantly insist that like you must have, which I'd like to talk about a bit more, but the idea that like you must have this perfectly logical chain of the theory down, starting from first principles. And this is, I get this from like the objectivists all the time, who are like, what's that guy? Oh, I'm blanking on his name. I met him at the Soho Forum, but he's always an objectivist who's always trying to get me to debate him.
Oh, Michael Leibowitz.
Yes.
Yes.
Michael Leibowitz. So he'll always like, like if I say something like, well, I'll be like, well, it's pretty immoral to like kill children. And he'll be like, you just made a moral claim. Why don't we debate on the foundation of morals? And I'm like, dude, I mean, no. I just have no interest in this. I mean, can we just start from the starting point that like intentionally killing little children is wrong? 99.99% of people agree with this. And then we could just go from there. And I don't have to start from like but look, even if you agree with him, because you're like, hey, no, you should start from Philip. There's something about the people who are obsessed with taking it, this logical chain that can't be broken, that end up arriving at the most horrific moral conclusions. Like all of the objectivists have been celebrating a genocide over the last 2 years for all their talk about like this perfect moral chain of clear thinking. And then they get to this point. And then like when I debated that Pellegrino guy, I mean, just can't even defend it at all. Once you get to the point of like, wait, but so your individualist philosophy now leads to this. And then I got to say, like, Zulu in the other example, it's like the whole debate is about how morally superior he is for being perfect or being, better than me because he would never compromise the true libertarian principles. And then at the end of it, he's describing a father allowing his children to be tortured to death rather than steal a penny. Now, Jacob, what could be more evil than that? That might be worse than genocide. It genuinely might be worse than genocide to allow, like, you're a father, dude. I'm a father. Allow your own children to die a brutal death rather than you steal a thing because you go, no, I'm virtuous. I'm virtuous and I don't do that. Could you think of a thing more evil than that? And look, this is a little bit above my intelligence level, but man, ain't it fascinating that the people who want to hold me down, who want to debate ethics and morals and like all this stuff, arrive at the most ridiculous conclusions. And I will say this to a lot of these guys, in the case of Leibowitz, and I don't mean to make this personal, dude, but like, there's something about the guy challenging me to debate morals and ethics, having the background that he has, that's a little like, really, dude, wow, okay. That's kind of interesting. But with all these guys, it's like the older I get, I become, and I think this is the natural order. I think this is correct. I get more and more certain about a narrower and narrower set of views. And I become more and more humble about a wider and wider set of views.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
That's just like the natural, that's what wisdom is, essentially. Like you kind of know what you know, and you also know what you don't know. And I understand that there are these guys who love to have this kind of like, I have this unified theory of everything, and I gain this moral superiority out of having it. And essentially, a lot of them like to say to me now that I just don't really understand that unified theory. Even though guys like Leibowitz, it's like, dude, I've read Ayn Rand. I already know what you're going to say. I've heard it said to me before. I get Zulu is more like, I combined Rand and Rothbard. Okay, I've read them both, and you're not the first one who's thought of combining the two. Like, no fucking kidding. Yes, obviously. Here's the thing. There's flaws in all this shit. Have a little bit of humility. Like, it's not, again, this is almost like the basic, like after a semester of philosophy 101, you're almost supposed to come away going like, look, everyone had some insights, but everyone had some holes. And I'll tell you that the older I get, the more I do. And this is where there might be a kernel of truth to them saying like, oh, Dave's deviated from where he used to be. Yeah, I think I'm more at a point where I think that Probably libertarians. Argumentation ethics is probably my favorite, although there are some holes in that too. It's probably not quite the proof that Hoppe thinks it is. Bob Murphy pointed out a few good ones. Natural rights theory, very compelling. There's some holes in it. Objectivism, there's just holes up and down, like the whole thing. Go watch Gene Epstein's debate with what's his name about that, where he tears them apart on the idea of selfishness and their whole thing. It's like, I think it's a more compelling argument than anything else. And I also think that on some fundamental human level, we all kind of know that like violations of other people's self-ownership is wrong. But there is, Jacob, like, I know me and you have talked about this before. In the Declaration of Independence, the founding fathers, they just settled on self-evident. And, there were like a few drafts of that. There were like arguments about what exactly it should say. And at the end, they just went, it's self-evident that God wants us to be free. Now, think about what a claim that is. That's a ridiculous claim, but it's so powerful too. And I actually agree with it. But it is ridiculous to say that that is self-evident. You know what I mean? Like that, because it's not self-evident that God exists. It requires some faith. And it's certainly not self-evident that if he existed, he doesn't want us to be brutalizing each other, because that's what we've been doing for a lot. So like, but at the same time, I guess the older I get, I do more and more just feel kind of like, yeah, if you're saying we should sacrifice the world rather than steal a penny, it's self-evidently stupid. Okay, that can be dismissed now and move on to the next thing. I actually don't think that requires a debate. And when 99.9% of the world already agrees with you, and as you all already indicated, including you guys in the future, like you guys who don't agree with me now will agree with me in the future that, yeah, actually we wouldn't do that, because that's actually the face of evil and not a moral act. It does leave you at a point where you're almost like, all right, dude, if you say you're morally superior to me because you would let everybody die and I wouldn't, I would kill to protect my kids, but you wouldn't steal a nickel to protect yours. If that makes you more of a libertarian or morally superior to me, then fine. You have that. Good.
And
best of luck.
And I'm sorry, like, I'm just going to repeat myself from the last time you were on my show. The Bible says that the man who does not provide for and protect his family is worse than an unbeliever, which, to them was like a big deal. And so it's like, I believe in the non-aggression principle. I think it's an objective truth. I obviously spend a lot of time from the Christian point of view trying to explain why I think it's commensurate with Christian ethics. And yet, because I don't have this sort of like religiously like warped view of libertarianism where like the nap becomes my sort of like guiding light. Like, no, it's like it is one moral duty in competition with other moral duties that I think come from God, that he's written on our hearts. And I think that Gene Epstein in his debate with David Friedman, I thought he had already kind of solved this dilemma for libertarians, because he's like, well, because I don't think, and I'm sure you would agree, we're not, and the penny thing is kind of silly, right? But like one of the examples,
he's saying he's going to bite the bullets, so bite the toughest bullet, dude. Like you can extend this principle down to some really wacky shit.
Let's use the penny, right? We would agree, even though it kind of seems silly, but just to entertain it, that sure, if you steal a penny, that you have committed theft. And if I stole a penny to save my child, I wouldn't say, well, it wasn't theft. It was still theft. And I would probably be like, dude, here's your penny back. And if he was really mad, I'd be like, fine, here's $1. Right? You know what I mean? Or I'd be like, I don't know. Like, what do you want?
I don't know, Jacob. Like, this is just, it's insane that we even need to say this. I mean, I remember back in the day, and this might have even been before I was a libertarian. I'd have to check the dates on this. It might have even been before I was a libertarian and I was just an anti-war Bush guy. But Glenn Greenwald and Sam Harris had these like dueling columns, like they debated writing columns back and forth. And Sam Harris had written this piece called The Case for Torture, which Sam Harris was always just so unimpressive and fucking whatever. But it was essentially the same thing as when he wrote like, what if the vaccine had been right? Like that whole argument. But he goes, oh, so you guys, you bleeding heart liberals are against the Bush administration instituting torture. Well, riddle me this. What would you do if there was a terrorist and the only way to stop a nuke from going off over Kansas was to torture him to get the information. And like, I remember literally just in my mind, I mean, this was 20 years ago or something like that. I don't know. But like, I remember just reading it as a kid and like, obviously, like, well, first off, you see like the 5 objections right away, which is like, when have we ever needed to torture information out of someone? What guarantee do you have that torture would actually get the info? But then you go, given all the things that you laid out, it's like, so torture them and get the information and then go to jail, motherfucker, or throw yourself on the mercy of the court. Like, if it's something so horrible, it's worth torturing them over, then it's something horrible enough for you to sacrifice your life for to save the nuke from going off, right? So you go to jail for torture forever. It should still be illegal, or you throw yourself on the mercy of the court. They go, hey, these were extenuating circumstances. They go, but this is like, I mean, Jacob, this is like the complexity that an 8th grader should have. The answer isn't let Kansas get nuked. What the fuck are we talking about? And by the way, dude, it's not that I couldn't, if I sat here, like, you know, you could come up with some like biblical argument for why you're not actually supposed to let Kansas get nuked, or I could come up with some rational philosophical argument. I could come up with it if I wanted to. Well, a philosophy should always serve life, or what I saw some of the objectivists arguing with him about this shit the other day. Philosophy should always serve life, and human flourishing is the highest goal, and therefore blah blah blah. But honestly, I just don't even care to come up with it, dude. It's so stupid. It can be rejected on its face, just like anyone would.
Well,
like,
and I think
this is just, I'm sorry, dude, once you get to that point, and this is the thing I said, by the way, that upset a lot of people on your show, that I stand by, but it's like, look, dude, when you get to this point,
right,
that's when you stop and you throw out everything you have and you go back to square one. Because I'm sorry, there's got to be like some, and I say this as an Austrian, right? Like, I'm saying there are things that we can deduce logically, but if your chain of logic, like, you could have enough humility as a human being, as a fallible human being, that if your chain of logic leads you toward allow children to be tortured to death, you go, nope. Start over. That can't be right.
Especially given the premise of like, I'm going to figure out the philosophy that's going to promote peace and human flourishing and voluntary interactions, and they get to the end conclusion of we just have to let the whole world die. It's like, yeah, there's something there that I think is wrong, and I think we've, you know, like,
and also, like, I mean, look, Jacob, is like, seriously, just zoom out for a second and try to imagine this, as we've kind of beat this horse to death, but try to imagine this from my perspective. That you're literally someone's going, hey, Dave, look, I know that you've, you know, like, I think pretty undeniably, you'd have to say on COVID, on Ukraine, and now on Gaza, obviously Gaza being the biggest of all of them. But I have like legitimately moved the needle on the national conversation. Now, how much exactly I've moved that needle is debatable, and whether how much that means is debatable, how much anything any of us do means is debatable. But like, I'm out there, I'm taking bullets from everywhere. You know what I mean? And I'm like, and I'm taking scalps in high profile debates. And then you're going to sit here and go, no. Dave's a cancer on this movement, because he won't also, while he's doing that, say that we should allow children to be tortured to death before we steal a nickel. You should add that into your repertoire, or you should come and debate that and let everybody know that this is a serious debate happening within your community. And the results of that will not be that a lot more people dismiss this as insane kookery. They'll actually take it up, and this will move the needle forward or something like that. Like, I mean, dude, what are we fucking talking about here? This is too goddamn ridiculous.
I guess
the fact that anyone thinks there's like an argument to that is concerning to me.
Well, they use the Isaiah's job, you know, gathering the remnant argument to try to say like, well, then you just have to be radical. And I'm like, but I think Dave's pretty I think half the reason Dave gets smeared so much is because he's insanely radical right now. Radical in one sense, in the other sense, it's like, you know, you're just getting up there and saying, can we please stop killing children, right? And apparently that's the most radical thing in the world to say.
Yes.
But
our form of radicalism, our form of radicalism is also common sense. And like, yes, so there's something, but there's something to that. But like also the idea, like, I just don't even understand some of these guys. Like, I saw in one of these things, I saw that someone was giving me shit for blocking that Mon Hop guy. And it's like, dude, I don't know. You say the dumbest shit in my goddamn replies every fucking day. Like, how much disrespectful dumb shit do you have to say before I'm like, yeah. Also, you're a monarchist Hoppian for open borders? Like, I'm sorry. You don't understand the first thing about any of the things you're even saying. First off, you can't be a monarchist Hoppian. That's a contradiction because Hoppe is not a monarchist. But his whole argument for monarchism was that it's preferable to public ownership of state property. It's
Right.
better to have it privately owned and managed as if it's private ownership. That's the whole argument. So, like, all these theory bros don't even have the fucking theory down. Like, and this is the thing that's so, like, infuriating. Like, they'll give me shit. Of course, you'll play clips from the Andrew Wilson debate. You'll play clips from, like, this is the thing now. You pick on, if I've done 35 debates and taken 33 skulls, but you'll pick the one where I didn't have a good canned answer. But, even in the Andrew Wilson debate, dude, the thing is that it's not that. I mean, look, obviously I could have done a better job in that debate. And I probably said some things that I was like, now I would say that differently if I could say that again. And I'm not trying to, like, whatever. I'm not, like, going to make excuses for why I could have done better in that debate. But it's like, the thing actually that you guys are missing is that they think they're like, Dave doesn't understand libertarianism 101. Like, he doesn't even know that the answer is this. But no, the difference is that I'm not like you guys. I'm not ideologically captured. When I talk about these things with people, I've read all the libertarian shit, and then I'm going, hey, here's how I feel about this. And let me explain. And if someone goes to me and they go, hey, well, are you saying that it would be immoral for a parent to stop their adult children from having incest? And you're like, he didn't immediately go, no, that would be, or you're like, well, all right. I'm willing to go, yeah, that's yeah, no, I guess it wouldn't be immoral exactly. I don't know. That is a complicated situation. And, like, yes, there is more than just Rothbardian ethics to the world. I don't
That's
like,
that's the whole thing here, is that, like, libertarianism is part of ethics. The legal theory is part of ethics, but there is more to ethics than just the non-aggression principle. And there's also, again, the practical concerns, right? Because I'm sure we could sit here and, like, because I had the same problem when I debated Andrew. And on one hand, I was like, well, I don't think that I want to, like, okay, I don't want a state to exist. So you could say, I don't want, the laws that ban, incest to exist. But it's also like, but dude, I'm not going out there, like, making that, as we talked about earlier with driver's licenses. That's not what you lead with. That's not
But
like
also, I don't even know, would that be immoral is a difficult question.
it
Shit's
is
more
difficult.
complicated than this, man. Like, have a little bit of humility. Like, yeah, no, it's not so clear what that would be, in the same sense that, like, if my adult son was a heroin addict or something like that, and I, like, locked him in a room and made him detox, is that immoral? Well, like, yes, I understand the basic libertarian principle of his self-ownership. Also, no, it's not so clear that that would be immoral, man. Life is complex. There's more complicated situations than that. And I don't agree that it's simpler than that. And I don't think I'm a sellout or something, or moderate, or, like, whatever. It's just like, no, I'm actually a thinking human being, not just somebody who's reciting my ideology. I don't believe in ideology.
There's different roles here, right? That I think there are people in the world who are going to just do philosophy. And there's probably in academic circles and in certain contexts, I find this stuff interesting, that, like, you can go down these rabbit holes, but I don't think that, like, well, that might be, maybe even say it's important, right? That to get some people to spend all their time trying to get the theory exactly right and building upon it. And, like, I think that's good. Like, people like Kinsella, people like,
Sure.
maybe Block in the past. But, like, we need those people. But, like, your job, and I don't, like, say this as, like, a derogatory thing, kind of just repeating your own words. Like, you're not a philosopher. You're not an economist. You are a comedian who's read a bunch of economists and philosophers, and you're going out there on big stages and you're trying to take all of their ideas, filter them through your own ideas, and persuade people. And especially on these huge stages where you're with Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson or Theo Vaughn or Joe Rogan, and you're like, hey, I'm not going to convince these people in one conversation or their audience to become Rothbardian anarcho-capitalists. But maybe on these most important issues, I can move them from this position to the correct position or more to the correct position.
Yeah, of
And you're
course.
not going to do that by leading with, "Hey, would you steal a penny to save the world? Because if you do, you're immoral,"
Well,
right? I mean,
look, dude.
you're not going to be
Also,
taken seriously on those stages if you do that.
I would just say, yes, that's true. Also, I'm not perfect. And there's, like there's things I could have said better in almost every show I've ever done that I probably didn't. Also, it's very easy to be a backseat driver, and it's a whole different thing to like go in there and do it. Like, it's even like going on, and don't get me wrong, I'm the same guy, by the way. And I see some of myself in some of these guys. Like, I'm the same guy. I was a theory bro in my 20s, and I was interested in that. And I was probably very critical of a lot of people who are on big stages and doing things. But like, also, guys like I said, the Zulu, he's a lot younger than me, I think, and has a following and has got a little bit of traction going. It's like maybe he'll be way bigger than I've ever
Oh,
been.
yeah, like, I
But
mean,
if
he's
he is, then he
clearly
will also
intelligent
face,
and
but then
yeah.
he will also face pressures the likes of which he has never fathomed, dude. Like,
Yeah.
there's just other shit that comes along with this. That's it, like, it's again, life is complicated, and it's best to be have some humility in as many areas as you can. All of that being said, you know, I just think that there's something. Look, like Ayn Rand was debatably like the greatest hero in liberty. Or, I mean, some of her work was so incredible. Some of her insights were so incredible. The way she was able to like popularize like a radical hatred of big government was just something that like no one of her time was able to do at all. The worst thing about Ayn Rand is that she insisted that everybody have to accept her entire unified theory of everything or they were out. Like, that was what she insisted on. And look at where her movement is today. It's an absolute disgrace. Just a joke, because that had absolutely no influence on anything. Totally irrelevant. And they've been cheering on a genocide for the last 2 years. And again, people can object to me saying the thing about like, oh, you're as bad as a commie or something like that. But again, like I said, what do we got? That Jack Lloyd guy, what's he been doing these last 2 years? Well, maybe not cheering on the genocide, but making every damn excuse for it that he can. And
Yeah.
what are we talking
No.
about here with Zulu? We're talking about letting your own children die rather than stealing, rather than committing a crime that doesn't even result in violence against a person. You should let your own. Yeah, dude, was I really wrong, guys? Or was I kind of on to something? With being so committed to your ideology that you would rather, and look, Jacob, as we've talked about before, you just see this shit all the time, man. It's a real problem. The reason why I talk about any of this shit is only because, like, I think it's a real problem in the liberty movement, or whatever we want to call this thing, that these type of, like, you see it all the time, man. I see it with some of these people who I'm so embarrassed that I ever like threw my support behind or whatever. But like, where they'll be tweeting every day about the latest libertarian drama. Like, the world around you is changing in these like monumental ways. We're living through one of the most interesting times in history. And all you want to talk about every day is who was wrong on the LNC and who did, and always with a real sense of self-virtue, like that you're so much better. And there, it's like, guys, I just think there's something wrong if you're like, if you've subscribed to an entire philosophical worldview that you can never ideologically deviate from, and is giving you this grand sense of feeling good about yourself. Like, two young men, if that's you, like, you're getting it wrong, dude. I'm telling Jacob, like, me and you, look, we're both, I mean, look, I'm an ANCAP in the sense that if you asked me what like the government economic policy should be, like they shouldn't have a policy. And what should the foreign policy be? Like there shouldn't be a policy. What should the border policy be? There shouldn't be a policy. Like none of this should exist. So, and
Right.
that's like I'm an ANCAP. That's what I believe in. And I still, despite my maybe like my humility about like whether any of these, you know, philosophies are as airtight, irrefutable proofs as they claim they are, I still do, which I can never get away from, is the fundamental libertarian insight, which I think is just correct, which is that morally speaking, the characteristic, like the moral character of an action can't change whether it's done by a government or a private person. That's just impossible.
Yeah.
Like, and so yes, in that sense, I'm an ANCAP. Now, do I think nation states are going away anytime soon? And do I think that am I going to spend my time arguing about that? Probably not. I don't think that's like the best use of my time. I suppose I could be wrong. It's a calculation we all have to make. Strategy is tough, and it's not the same thing as theory, no matter how many people like to say it is. But like, yes, in that sense, I am a pure anarcho-capitalist libertarian. But you can be that, and you can also recognize that like life is complicated, man. And there is like, okay, let me just say this. You're an anarcho-capitalist. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. Do you, for a second, Jacob, think that the thing I respect about you more is that you're an anarchist rather than a minarchist? Or do you think the thing I respect about you is that you bust your ass to support your family and give them a good life?
Yeah.
Like genuinely,
No,
which one do you think I respect about you more? Now, what do you think you respect about me more? So I'm just making the point that even if you are completely right on theory and somehow you've figured it out, that it's as simple as never regress, no matter what the situation is, it's never morally acceptable to aggress, which I think is goofy, frankly, and ridiculous. And I think no serious libertarian believes that. I know Ace asked me that on Twitter the other day, and I got nothing against that guy. I don't know much about him, but he asked me, is it pretty simple, dude? Is it ever morally acceptable to aggress? You think that's simple? I don't think that's simple at all. I think there's lots of situations I could think of where like, yes, it would be acceptable in these extenuating circumstances. But let's say you're right and you've cracked the whole goddamn code. You're perfect, you know, and that's right. You're never supposed to aggress. The homeless guy shitting on a playground is a hero. The dad should let his kids get killed before he steals a penny. That none of that makes you a good person. None of that actually speaks positively to your moral character. Go be a good person to somebody. Go go after you've like gotten in an argument with your wife and then walk down the stairs stewing, and then you get into the kitchen and you go, all right, shit, that was actually kind of my fault. And then you walk back up and you go, all right, look, I'm sorry. I was too snappy. I shouldn't have. That is more impressive to me in terms of like your moral character than whether like you're a commie or a libertarian anyway. So there's my commie insult back to you. Be a good person. And it doesn't matter that you're worse than a Nazi or a commie. But I'm just saying this point to go, I think there's like there's a real issue amongst that, especially amongst some of the younger libertarians. And you know, again, I guess the reason why I want to address any of this shit is because I do care about that on some level. I think those guys should strive. Listen, I will try my best to strive to like still stay in touch with you guys as a community, you know, and still like respond to things if there's libertarians who are like, hey, we think you're messing up or you're not representing us in the right way. But maybe I would also ask some of you younger guys who have never had to go through any of the goddamn pressure I've gone through, who, look, just being quite frank, since they've been kind of disrespectful to me, have never moved the needle in the way that I have, or even, slightly.
no, it's fair. Yeah.
Maybe you guys should also have a little bit of humility, that there might be a little bit more to life than I've figured out goddamn everything about philosophy in my 20s.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think that I don't know if pushback's the right word. The only concern I have, because like this is complicated. This is getting into the whole like life is complicated, right? Like I know people who I think have even like their political ideologies, I think are just fundamentally wrong and evil. And yet, because I know them, because like maybe I go to church with them or I went to school with them, I know they're like actually like good people. But as you said, the libertarian insight is that we can't sort of divorce, if something is done by a private person versus if they're, wearing a badge or they're a
Hmm.
government official. And I do think that even though, like, I agree with you on sort of like the philosophical framings that we talked about, and I'm not with Zulu and his crowd in terms of like they're more in that like objectivist anarchist camp and all that. Um, but I am like, I think you know this is a real struggle. And I know you struggle with this too, but like the whole immigration thing that's going on right now is really tough because on one hand, I agree with you that there are, and I think open borders libertarians are goofy when they don't acknowledge this, that there are absolutely consequences and perhaps even potentially like fatal consequences to just kind of saying the libertarian position is open borders. And so therefore we have to, as you said in your debate with Alex Narasta, that we have to bite the bullet that there is no limit to who can come in here, period. Right. And that because like, that would even rule out an Ellis Island sort of immigration policy. But I am somewhat concerned that, and this is even just towards you, I think even towards fellow, like Meacock libertarians, guys who I'm friends with beyond you, have moved more in the sort of like supporting the current immigration policies, at least in part. 'Cause I know you've said like, well, maybe it's too heavy-handed, and I hope he could like, find a way to deport these people in a way that's not as heavy-handed or as violent. But I don't know. I guess there's part of me that's kind of going like, if Zulu and his crowd were just criticizing you on that, I'd have more like I agree with you. We should have these dialogues in good faith with respect to be like, I've always told you like, I don't like I get your concerns with immigration. I don't completely align there, but I still view you as like an overwhelming positive because like you're right on in my mind, you're perfectly right on everything else. But I do think that there is a concern from some in the movement that as much as like you're advocating that for like maybe not directly, you're saying, but you are in a way advocating for like Palestinian children to not be aggressed against by the Israeli government and the
Hmm.
American government. But there are like we're talking about like families and whatnot. Like I do know families and people who have been torn up because of Trump's immigration policy. So there's a real tension there, right?
Oh yeah,
And
no, look, no question about that. And there's a look, there's a real debate to be had about all of this stuff. And I think that certainly I wouldn't say that I support the way the administration's been doing. I mean, I think it's been as mismanaged as could possibly be. And yes, there's also a point that that's somewhat predictable when you're talking about the government doing just about anything. So there's a real argument to be had there. I think maybe that's an interesting, like fuller conversation than we'll maybe be able to do
right,
justice
yeah,
on this show. But I do think that like, look, the reason why I keep harping on these kind of like fundamental thought experiments or these bullets to bite. And one of the things at least I kind of respect about the way Zulu's framing this is that I feel like he is one of the few ones who's going, oh, no, 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 I'll bite those bullets. But then you're like, look what biting those bullets actually is. And that's kind of the whole point I was trying to get to. Now, I think these guys would say that, or I think from their perspective, perhaps, which I think, I think a lot of these guys are a little bit delusional when they're trapped in their own perspective. That, they're like, well, the reason Dave's taken these comfy debates, but he won't debate one of us. And to their point, I understand where this could be reinforced by the view that, as you said, when I debate someone like Alex Nawashta, I do hold those poison pills against him. And I go, well, are you willing to bite this poison pill? And he goes, I don't really want to bite that. And then you go, okay, but you're talking as if you would bite that poison pill. And so then they'll go, oh, see, he'll debate that guy because he can get him on the poison pill thing, but
right.
we're willing to bite the poison pills so he can't get us. Again, I would say, like, from my perspective, it's like, no, I was looking for the best, most competent debate opponent I could get. I was trying to get, what's his name? The case
Oh,
against education, Brian Kaplan,
Ryan Kaplan,
and
yeah.
then he couldn't do it, and so I got Alex. I had tried to get Brian before, and then I ended up debating Spike Cohen about it. Like I was always trying to get the best guy, but that was because I think like from my perspective, I go biting these bullets are just so fundamentally unserious that it's not really even worth debating. And, you know, that they could argue that they don't think that's the case, or they could, I don't know. I saw at one point Zulu said in the video that he had predicted the reasons why I would turn down a debate with him in the video, but I never made it that far into the video. So I don't know if you did. I don't know if this is one of the things he predicted. It'd be the reason, not that it proves anything if you predicted it, but like, I don't know, dude. I'm not even saying I'm against it. It's just that the debate comes down to like, that's so self-evidently wrong that, okay. And like, anybody who thinks it would be anybody who thinks a dad who would let his kids die rather than steal a penny is really moral, you go with him. And anyone who thinks that's the most horrifically immoral thing a dad could do, you come over here with me. Like, is that the debate? I'm kind of open to the idea, but what are we even debating now? If you're talking about issues like, you know, talking about like, hey, okay, so all your points, you know, being made, what level of like mass deportations can we support? What are the, you know, what is the human toll of that? Or even questions which maybe if we have time, we could get into some of them, like, was the Mises Caucus, you know, like a failure, or who exactly failed? You know, I think there's lots of room for good faith conversations on all of those topics. And to be honest, in the spirit of what I've been saying this whole time, I'm a little mixed on all of it, you know, like, yeah, there's real issues to be discussed with all of this stuff. It's just like, I guess the problem is that with this particular debate, it's like, you know, like I always, or at least I think I pretty reasonably try in debates to always match the energy of my opponent. But it's like, if you're coming at me in a wildly disrespectful, like you're a cancer on the liberty movement, then the debate is going to become like a blood sport. It's going to, and I have the ultimate ace in my hole, that in my, which is just that, like, you believe you should sacrifice your own kids, so you got nothing to say about anything to any reasonable person. Whereas, like, I just think in some ways a broader conversation about a lot of these things might be the right thing to do. That's kind of what I was hoping for when we did that, when you hosted with me that spaces where we kind of had everyone on. But then everyone always complains about the spaces is that you end up arguing with a whole bunch of different people, and this person got too much time and that person didn't get enough time, and then the accusation is like, you intentionally gave that person more time. And you're like, dude, I didn't even run the thing. I don't even know any of these people. I didn't know Michael Tracy was going to come in and talk for so damn long, you know. So like, I don't know exactly what the best format is to do that, but like, I'm down to have those conversations. I thought I was like, you know, my response to the whole Mises Caucus thing at the end was essentially that, like, hey, this thing failed and it's all my fault, and so blame me for it. Like, but I'm happy to talk more about that. But anyway, you know, to your, like, those are interesting conversations. I don't know how long you want to go for tonight. I want to make sure, if we're going to move to those conversations, I do just want to address the one last thing about the video, which was the accusation that I was.
Yeah, no, that's totally ridiculous. I mean, go ahead.
Well, I mean, look, dude, I don't know how much of this even needs to be addressed. Once again, with those two, I'm really just at this point, like, also, like, they've blocked me and talked shit to me behind the block. Like, even when I had, like, I was fairly open to a debate at one point, but like, whatever. I don't really wish to engage with that anymore. As I've said before, I think there's some really weird stuff going on there, and I don't really wish to be a part of it. Look, dude, the idea that I was calling for violence against a particular woman when I made the statement that I made on your show is, as you said, absolutely absurd. I said it on the Christian Libertarian podcast to you and your buddy. There were, I don't know how many people watched the show, at least like several thousand people watched that show.
Yeah.
Okay. So thousands of people heard that show 2 years ago, including you. Not a single one of them came away thinking Dave just called for the violence of this person. And yes, dude, Zulu, I even saw, you know, that Zach guy, who like I said, I like him and I respect him. He had at first said, hey, you know, I think there's some real reasonable criticisms in this video that you should address. And I was like, okay. And then I saw him arguing once it got to that point where he was like, yeah, you guys really did dishonestly edit this video. And then Zulu was like arguing that he didn't somehow. And it's like, dude, I mean, I'm sorry. That was the most dishonest editing imaginable, dude. He cuts out the part where I'm obviously making it a hypothetical. Like
Three stages of hypotheticals. You were
yes.
like, if I was poor, if I only made $30,000 a year,
Well, look,
and my kids were put in this
I'm
school,
sorry.
and yeah,
It's too ridiculous. Obviously, the point that I was making, and I'm sorry, I didn't misspeak on this. Like, it was very clear if you listen to it. I was going, look, man, like you guys, because at the time they had bit the bullet. Now they're pretending they hadn't. But at the time, they bit the bullet and said, yes, we should be against all restrictions on public property, meaning immediately libertarians should support like homeless junkies being able to go into the 4th grade elementary school girls' bathroom or whatever. And look, obviously, in this scenario, it doesn't matter what libertarians say. None of this is happening tomorrow. We say abolish the state. Okay, the state's still here. So it doesn't matter. Right. But I was just saying to them, I was like, look, and I was making the point that I was just making just now. Like, these people don't have children. They don't understand what they're saying. I was talking to 2 fathers as I was saying it. And I was going like, look, dude, I'm not in this situation. But like, imagine I was in this situation where I'm making 30 grand a year and I'm broke and my wife's working and I can't homeschool my kids or send them to a nice little private school. And I can't do all these things. And then you were actually putting my kids in danger in this hypothetical situation. Let me say, there's some things worth killing over. There's some things worth dying over. It was not a fucking call to violence to any libertarian. No, it was a warning. Not. It was a warning to libertarians that you're talking to people who are in that situation. And if you're saying this to them, that understand that normal, decent, moral parents will kill to protect their children. There's as big a contrast as you could have. Zulu won't steal a penny to save his children. I will kill to save my children. If you want to think you're on the moral high ground there, great, dude. Good luck with that. But I was warning them that like you're advocating for something that is something that people are willing to die over. Like, which is the protection of their children. You're advocating for something that you know will endanger real children in this world. That's what I was saying. Anybody watching that honestly knows that's what I was saying. And like, no, don't give me shit about like, well, what was I supposed to do? Keep the entire 2-hour podcast? No, but if you were going to play that, you could keep the chunk where it was obviously a hypothetical. You could not defend after the fact that like, what do you mean? What was missing? Like, sorry, dude, you're not that stupid. You're lying. You know that you cut out a part that like at best, most generously you'd go, like, it sure doesn't sound like, what are the odds that I came on the Biblical Anarchy podcast to call for the death of like a,
and I just stood there like, oh, Dave just said to kill this woman, and I'm just going to sit here and nod and be like, no, because I followed it up by saying the verse I already quoted earlier, which is, if you don't provide for your family, you're worse than. So I was like making that point because I knew exactly what you were talking about, because you were responding to what I said, where I said like, the pernicious part about this is that at least with a public park, you're not forced to go there unless you have the means to opt out, and not all states even allow that. If you have the means, you're forced to send your kids to school. So, and Jack and like their whole arguments being like, well, you should just not send them. I'm like, it's just, that's where you're like, yeah, this, like, call it not being pragmatic, call it being divorced from reality.
Well, also it's just, if you guys, you know, I remember this. Look, I mean, a lot of people, I don't even want to say anything about them specifically anymore, but like a lot of people, and I remember this from, so like when I was a youngin in the liberty world, and I was first coming up, and when I first started my podcast, you know, there were these guys like, and again, I'm not even trying to trash these guys. I mean, I had my issues with Kokesh at certain points, but like, I don't care. I have no idea what he's doing now. But there were like Larkin Rose and Adam Kokesh, and there were these guys who I would kind of put in that vein of like the theory bros. And they were way out ahead of me. I mean, they had big platforms before I had anything going on. And I watched these guys just kind of fall into irrelevance because they kind of never spoke to the moment. They never spoke to like the
Right.
crises that actually mattered. They never really knew anything about what was going on in the news. It was always kind of like, I got my non-aggression principle, bro, and I don't really need to fucking. But whereas like I was like, no, dude, I got to really understand like how the clean break led to the war in Syria. Like I got to really understand all this. I got to really do my homework. I got to read all my shit. I got to know what's going on today. I got to have answers to all these different things. And I'm just saying, it's like the guys who just had their pure theory, like again, like you said, like maybe there's a role for people doing that. Hey, I mostly agree with those guys' theory, not completely. I kind of have the same feel, like I agree with them except for immigration and a couple other topics probably. But like, okay, it's just that to me that never really seems to make an impact or move the needle. It's like the theory guys say, if you ever compromise the theory at all, then you never move the needle. But then at the same time, none of them ever want to disavow Ron Paul because like they all kind of know that like he moved the needle more than
Yeah.
anybody else. Even though, again, like I said at the very beginning, right? My first criticism of the video is like, fucking, you could say the same things about him, say any of them, right? Like where he wasn't as radical, wasn't just a theory bro, would had his theory, but would always talk about the issues of the day. And so I guess like, in a sense, a lot of those guys, it was like we were talking past each other, all of us, because a lot of them would just say back, they'd be like, well, the answer is privatize the school, or we
And
should
you're
just
like,
be
yeah.
pushing, we should just be pushing toward privatizing it. And it's like, yeah, dude, but here's the thing. That's nice if you just want to be an irrelevant theory bro who writes books about the theory that's already been worked out by a lot of other people and then kind of act like you added something to it, even though like I'll say there's this one thing about me is that I never acted like I was adding anything to the libertarian theory. I always just said, I've read these guys, and then I read these guys, and these guys persuaded me over these guys. Like Hoppe and Rothbard convinced me that like Jacob Hornberger is wrong on immigration or whatever. And it's like, but so if you want to just be one of those irrelevant theory guys, like, okay, if you actually want to get out and start getting your hands dirty and moving the needle at all in the way I am, then you actually have to have more answers than just that. You actually have to,
Exactly.
when you have an immigration crisis and a homeless, encampment on the street crisis and like all these different things, you have like major cities across the country where there's needles on the ground and there's people lying in their own shit and piss. Yeah, you actually have to have something to say about that other than, well, in my utopia, that wouldn't be there. Like,
Exactly.
what?
And
Okay.
there's an element of like maybe they're so focused on philosophy, they don't know enough about just basic human psychology. And I think that part of to touch on something you've done recently that I thought you handled brilliantly, which touches on this, was your conversation with Nick Fuentes. And you got and I think Tucker did the same thing. You guys came from different angles. And I sometimes feel like whether we're talking about wanting to disavow people of statism or we're wanting to disavow people of anti-Semitism or other, wrong think, right? And yeah, I think there are bad ideas in the world and that it is better to try to persuade people to not be those things. But I think there's this weird, I don't know if I wanna call it woke, but, like, there's this weird kind of thing where it's almost like some of the libertarian purists are acting the same way like a woke leftist will or like the Zionist will, that you just talked to Nick Fuentes and didn't sit there and immediately, like, disavow every statist and anti-Semitic and whatever thing he ever said as if, like, and, like, what would that accomplish, right? Like, that conversation would have been completely unproductive. It would have persuaded
Right.
no one. Whereas what you did was have a conversation where you're like, building a repertoire with him, talking about your past beefs, talking about like stuff he's been through that is kind of like no matter what you think about his beliefs, the fact that like the stuff he went through at like 18 years old is just absolutely like insane. Like I can't even fathom
Yeah, yeah.
what he went
Well, and
through.
also
And
like
then
I'm
and then then, it's not like you then just did that the entire time. You did go, "Hey, let's talk about our disagreements," but doing it in the most charitable way possible and prioritizing the most important disagreements that you wanted to talk about with him. And it's like, that's how you move the needle. That's how you persuade someone. And sure, like having some background in understanding philosophy and understanding ethics is important for being able to evaluate geopolitics, right? Like that
Yeah.
helps you to understand why Israel's war in Gaza is unjust and you know something approximating or approaching genocide if it isn't, right? But then like how you convince people of that who don't already have that view isn't just by, you know, like endlessly theorizing at them. You have to have conversations with them, and that's how you move the needle. And that
Well,
sometimes
especially with right-wing critics, because that's the whole
right.
criticism. It's like, yeah, you're lost in your highfalutin ideas, but here in reality, we're getting killed. And I watched this. I
Yes.
remember, part of the impetus for me having all the alt-right guys on back in the day, like when I had like Richard Spencer and Christopher Cantwell and those guys on, was that I had watched Adam Kokesh go out and just get destroyed by these guys in debates. And it fucking burned me up. Oh my God. I remember being furious about it. I was like, yo, you're going up there, because he'd literally go like, I mean, I remember in debates with alt-right guys, they'd be like, hey, our country's being replaced. We're being overhauled. We're going to be a radically different nation in like one generation than we are today. And we have no ability to stop that. And he would go, well, the answer is the non-aggression principle. And like, you're like, Jesus Christ, dude, like you got to have something a little bit more tangible for them. And so I do think there's like, look, like this in a way is one of the, like, back to the thing I said about Ayn Rand being like, why Barry Goldwater failed is because he wasn't like philosophically pure enough or something like that. There is this unbelievable disconnect that it's amazing that libertarians have still not been able to like grapple with, reconcile with, that you're like, hey, so you're telling me you're philosophically perfect and yet you're losing.
Yeah.
Okay, so might we deduce that philosophical consistency is not like what really moves people? I mean, how much more evidence for that do you need? And then to go like, no, you have to, like, I see it like just in terms of like, if you believe that we got to get through to people, and look, you can make the argument in a way, like, Zulu would say, I'm not speaking to the remnant anymore, even though, am I not, in the same way that Ron Paul was? How am I not speaking to the remnant? How are we not all speaking to the remnant anytime we tell the truth? That's really what speaking to the remnant is. Everybody speaks to the remnant all day, or part of
Yeah.
their day. Like that's part of what life is, or that's part of what telling the truth is in any capacity you do it. But the idea, like, I'm sorry, when we sit in this moment that we're in today, and like if any libertarian is going to go, hey, there are these crises that genuinely threaten to destroy the country, and they're all the result of like, big government is an gigantic super states and the policies that they impose on people. And also the technology has allowed it so that a guy like me can get on gigantic platforms, like really like have a huge audience of people who will hear what I have to say. In these moments where the trust and the belief in all of the institutions has evaporated, and we can speak to bigger audiences than ever, and there's these crises that are going to destroy the country, that in that moment the answer is to like insist on ideological purity to a level that like you should be suicidal essentially. It's just okay, well, good luck. You go do that and see how that works, and I'm gonna go keep doing what I'm gonna do, and that's kind of that.
No, I agree with that. I wanted to touch, we kind of mentioned it and then dropped it, the whole Mises Caucus thing, because
Sure.
I do think that, looking back on it, there are, I think it's not just you. I think there are mistakes that were made strategically. There were just things that we couldn't have predicted that happened. Uh, so, but just more meta level, I don't think that the project was a failure in terms of like it. I think it moved the needle, or at least injected something into the movement and the party that I still see people talking about. And I think like if we're going to talk about principles at all and marry that to strategy, I still think that what the Mises Caucus kind of the bread and butter, like the decentralized revolution and like starting local and sort of like trying to I still think nothing has, so in one way, what you said earlier, like the world is changing around us, right? And I agree, there's a lot of things shifting. And yet I think the strategy that like you and like us Mises people had when we kind of started this thing back in like, 2018 and then through 2020 is still the same, which is that radical pragmatism that we talked about earlier. It's the idea of like, on the most important issues of the day, we're going to speak the uncompromised, unflinching truth about what's going on in Israel, about what's going on in Ukraine, all these things. And connected to like you do
Yeah,
bring
yeah.
up
Well, that's
still
right.
economics and things in the theory. You brought up, I said this to Zulu when I talked to him last, like on Theo Von's show, you gave a brilliant like monologue explaining what libertarianism is to a huge audience. So you still connect it, but like you talk about real world things, then connect it to the theory. But then on top of that, this idea of like, well, then how are we going to solve these problems? And
Yeah,
I think we're kind of even like something as controversial as immigration. Like, well, the only way to really solve that is that like we have to go back, at least like forget anarcho-capitalism. Let's
yeah.
just go back to like federalism. Let's go back to
Well,
like
it's like
letting the
even
states have their own sovereignty to set some of these things. And
right,
I still
right.
think that like decentralization, no matter what issue we're talking about, is sort of the only viable path forward that's not like some kind of like suicidal accelerationism, which, I
Yeah.
obviously
Well,
don't
well.
want.
I mean, I guess so. Hey, look, there's a few things that just come to my mind, but then let's talk about like the Mises Caucus stuff a bit. But dude, what I've always been following is the Ron Paul model. And whether or not that's his political strategy, just like his communication strategy, right? And like Ron Paul would always um like he'd always lead with the most important issue and what the most important thing, the crises that are facing the nation, and he'd be great on those. And then if you asked him about it, he was quite happy to tell you that like he had like this set of underlying principles that it was the reason why he drew all these conclusions. But also he would say things like, even in Rothbard's great essay, what was it, the paleo libertarian strategy, where he says, look, there are these issues like, and one of the ones he mentions is pornography being like porn, like, what's the libertarian position on pornographic magazines being out on a newsstand in public in plain view of children walking by? And what was the Rothbard and Ron Paul answer? Like, let the states and the local governments figure that out. Now that's not exactly the pure libertarian position, I suppose, but like also, as I've kind of gotten at, is not exactly the pure libertarian position that on public roads there ought to be no rules about anything either. And so like
Exactly. Yeah.
it would always be like, yeah, dude, like I don't know, just like whatever's reasonable there. And I do think like, by the way, this is a point I wanted to make because I think I may have said this to you in a previous podcast, but this is one thing that I want to throw at the theory bros, because I remember back when I was kind of a theory bro. And this might be like, I want to say this was like in 2010, maybe 2009, if I'm like roughly guesstimating. So I was born in 83. I'm like 25 or whatever. Did I do the math right on that? Something like that, 26. So I remember I was like obsessively reading about libertarian theory. And I remember the first time I ever got to easements, and like like the kind of theory on easements or whatever.
Yeah, of
So
course. Yeah.
for libertarian theorists, nerds that know this. And I remember there was some part of me that was like, hey, that was kind of bullshit what we just did right there. Like we kind of just yada yada over that whole contradiction to our worldview, like it's basically like you get to a point where you're like, okay, but what if somebody's completely landlocked? Like what if you just got like an enemy, and you got a lot more money than them, and so you buy all the property that surrounds their house, and then you go, hey, you're not allowed to trespass, you got to stay and starve to death in your house. And then all of the anarcho-capitalist theorists, like I remember Walter Block explaining this and just kind of being like, this don't make no sense, man. But it wasn't like a big enough thing that I just overlooked it because I wanted to have this unified theory of everything in my head. But like, no, the correct anarcho-capitalist position really deduced from our principles is like, tough, you own that land and you got the right to say, hey, you can't leave. But what happens there, Jacob? Then we got to go to war because no one's going to accept I just got to starve to death on my property. So because we value peace over conflict, we just kind of went, nah, all right, fine, make an easement. You know, like there's no real, you can't really deduce from libertarian first principles that like you have to make that easement. By the way, that's a challenge to the theory bros. Do you guys all reject easements? Like, is every libertarian theorist wrong about this? Because like, where do you really get that from first libertarian principles?
I
It's
don't
not
know.
your
I think
property.
I mean, but at the same time, like, you can use your property to aggress against someone. So I think
But I'm not
if you
aggressing. I'm
landlocked.
not aggressing, dude. I'm just telling you, you can't trespass on my property. That's not aggression, according to libertarians. I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
I don't
Jacob.
know.
Is that aggression to say you can't trespass on my property?
If well, so
It's a
well,
hole in libertarianism is the
but, like,
answer, dude.
yeah, I don't know, but, like, if I, like,
It
I don't
doesn't
know,
listen.
if I
We can
surrounded
admit.
you.
So, okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead. No,
Well,
no, no.
like
Let's
like,
do this.
well, okay, so, like, 'cause I thought about this too, like, if I it'd be really weird, right? But, like, if I surrounded you with things I owned that, like, was, like, like a rope that was, like, in poison, right? And I was just like, "No, this is my rope, you can't touch it, you can't try to, get
Whose
around it," and
property are we on?
no, that's a good point. Uh, yeah. No, I guess that is
You're on
different.
your property, dude.
Yeah.
You're on your property. I'm not doing anything to you. I just voluntarily bought all the surrounding property from your neighbor who owns it, and I'm simply saying no trespassers allowed. I'm sorry, dude. From first libertarian principles, yeah, you're allowed to do that. But look, here's my point. My point isn't therefore you should reject libertarianism. My point is that there's a hole in it. Every other theory has like 65 big holes in it. So like I still go
No,
with ours over
right.
theirs. I'm just saying, like, give me the answer to this, that why, from a libertarian perspective, can I not voluntarily buy up all the property around you and then simply say that I do not consent to you entering my property and I will shoot trespassers?
No, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this is the nirvana fallacy, which is that, like, there is no and I think sometimes libertarians, we can do this where we think we have the answer for everything, but that's not libertarianism. To be true doesn't mean that we now can prevent every bad thing from ever happening ever.
That's right. Well, that's right. But
That's
also
not realistic.
in that area, we just go, all right, well, you got to let that guy pass through because, like, come on, it's just unreasonable. And so, I
Right.
guess my point is that, like, even I heard you mention on one of your shows recently where, like, I had said the thing where, like, you have the best claim to the land or something like that. It's like, yeah, dude, look, this is my best interpretation of, like, after taking, not being ideologically captured, yet hearing all of these philosophers and then taking in, like, what I take away from it is that you go, look, and I guess I would say something like kind of starting with argumentation ethics or something close to that. I think it's pretty reasonable to say that, like, um, peaceful solutions are preferable to violent solutions. We kind of all demonstrate that by talking with each other, and you know what I mean. Like it's preferable. The idea of self ownership. Someone I saw, even when I tweeted this, someone goes, ask him to explain how we have self ownership. He sure couldn't do it with Andrew Wilson. Explain it now. And it's like, yeah, but like even the way you word that, like we don't really have self ownership. We believe that we ought to have self ownership, which
Well,
is
and
like,
I have the Christian problem there, where I say it's I don't I think self-ownership is a cool legal idea, but I think God
right,
owns everything, so I
right,
can't
right.
actually fully affirm self-ownership. So now I've upset all the theory bros.
Right. So in a sense, I in a sense agree with you. And I actually think all these moral theories kind of fall apart without God. You really like, I actually don't think you can really get to any sense of morality really without God. But again, that's a topic for another conversation, to really get the objectivists mad. But I do think that's true. And I think that even I actually even we like a whole nother 3-hour conversation. But I actually think Descartes' starting point, which Zulu correctly points out that he contradicts in his own writings, but the starting point of like I think therefore I am actually isn't that unreasonable of a starting point. Like, yeah, that really is all we know. Is like I know I exist. I don't even really know you exist. It just seems more reasonable to act as if you do than not. And I think that's like I feel this way across the board. Like the idea that we all own ourselves is just a more reasonable starting point than that anybody else owns anyone else, because there's inherent like victimization in that, and there's inherent, and so like I don't know, I guess I do in a sense, like where like I said before, where yeah, like I'm still an ANCAP, I'm still a radical libertarian because I think that's the correct like policy, I do have just much more humility where I go, look, I think reality being objective, even the objectivist's first starting point, is not actually something we know for sure. Like
No,
it's like
they take it on faith,
well, that's right.
in my
I mean, look,
opinion,
dude.
yeah.
Well, if you just go, how do you know we're not in a sophisticated simulation that could simulate everything that you've ever experienced? Well, the answer is you don't. But there's no reason to assume that that's the case. It seems more reasonable to assume that we're perceiving objective reality. So I get, like I said, I'm just humble about a lot of the more broad questions, and I'm more and more certain that like what Israel's doing to Gaza is horrifically wrong, and that we
Right.
shouldn't be supporting that. So like that, I'm sure that is reflected in my public persona. Now to the Mises Caucus stuff, it's all, again, there were some good things that came out of all of it. There were some failures that came out of all of it. There were some really bad decisions that I personally made in the whole thing. And there's no end to that list. Like a bunch of mistakes that I made, including supporting and allying with a whole bunch of people who I never should have, that I regret very much. But not not like the core group of people I love. I don't regret, working with you and Heiss and Scott Horton and stuff. But, there's obviously going to be the most pressure and the biggest magnifying glass on what we did. If like Zulu feels like he set Twitter on fire or Liberty Twitter on fire, not Twitter, I'm sorry. But Liberty Twitter on fire. Okay, dude, we had that shit blazing for years. Like, if that's the sign of victory, then let me tell you something, son. Get in line. It's like you have no idea what it's like setting that thing really on fire. When I was a kid, Jay-Z and Nas had a beef, and it was like the two biggest rappers in New York beefing. And Jay-Z had one line in a song. Is it Nas? Like one of the guys in his crew was called Jungle. And then Jay-Z had a line because he was like the biggest rapper in the world at the time. And he had a line where he said, "The little homie jungle is a garden to me," which was a great line. It's like, yeah, it seems like a jungle to you, but that's a garden. Like, you think that was lighting Liberty Twitter on fire? Let me tell you something. Come walk in my shoes from 2020 to 2022 or something like that. Yeah, I mean, look, there's no question. Like we brought a lot of energy into it. We tried a big thing. We had a lot of lofty goals. A lot of it didn't end up working out the way that we hoped it would. Some things did happen. There were some tangible victories from it. I also think, like, do you remember? I remember at one point where a few of the post-libertarian guys split off and they did the Mises GOP.
Yeah, I remember that.
thing.
Yeah.
How'd that work out? The whole premise of it was this is going to be more pragmatic. This is going to be realistic. Republicans, you can actually win real political power, but like, have I beaten any of those guys up? I don't know. They tried something, man. Like they tried, has Tho Bishop been successful with the Republicans? I don't know. He's trying. He's probably made some gains and had other things that he would have let, it's like, I always, with all these libertarian strategies, I always think like, a lot of us try a lot of different things. Some of them work in some ways that they don't. Look, there's no question that what we ultimately went with, which was essentially a lot of us supporting Donald Trump in exchange for trying to get some stuff out of the administration, that there are pros and cons to that can be debated for a long time. And yeah. I certainly think, let's say I think there were some people, like I didn't support the strategy initially, and I ultimately went with it because just at that point, it seemed like the only play where something positive might come from it. And one of the things, I've been quite open about this, but one of the biggest mistakes I made, besides, supporting some candidates for president that I certainly shouldn't have, was that I just always, I guess I took it as a given, like I took it for granted, that like if we were in charge, we would pick a really awesome presidential candidate, and that would be the thing that led to all this excitement. And it wasn't until I pulled out And I was like, shit, I got to try my best to get someone really good to replace me. And I started going around trying to convince people. And like, I mean, at this point, I don't think I'm giving anything away to say that, like, I really tried to convince Judge Napolitano to do it. I tried to convince Spike Cohen to do it. I tried to convince, there's some other people who I won't mention that I tried to convince Scott Horton to do it. I tried to convince a lot of other people to do it. And every time I was trying to convince them to do it, I realized how difficult of a sell it was. Like, I was like, yo, and let me say, I'll tell you, part of the reason why that was such a difficult sell was that I had to be honest with them and be like, look, if you want to do this, forget even like the arrows that you're taking, forget even like the major risk, which is like, again, I think people who aren't in the arena, it's very easy to judge other people who are, but like, let me tell you something I've particularly found out this last year. There are real risks to this game. Like, if you really started getting traction and you're like leading the abolish the CIA movement, like, you're taking your life in your hands. There are killers out there. There are really bad people who take that very seriously and also will lose no sleep at night over this. But forget that, Jacob. That's not even the thing. That you're gearing up to maybe be putting your own life in jeopardy if you're successful. The fact is that before you even get the nomination, other libertarians are going to try to ruin your life. And I know you've dealt with some of this shit yourself, and I'm not exaggerating here. I mean, try to ruin your life in a way that you almost can't imagine, that you're like, wait a minute, hold on. That wouldn't be off limits to you? Like trying to destroy my marriage, trying to get my kids taken away, try to like, then they've, and you know, like, hey man, if you don't have every damn hole in your personal life plugged up, then like you really got to think about this before you made that decision. But if you go out there and you try to do this, even short of like people trying to ruin your life, you'll have 3.5 hour movies made about what a terrible person and what a cancer you are. if you're guilty of being as pure as Ron Paul. You're still going to have to deal with all that shit. Don't tell me for a second. Again, like, I don't want to harp on this again, but that was the thing that bothered me the most about the, like, shut the fuck up, dude. Ron Paul supported Pat Buchanan for president. So don't sit here and tell me that you wouldn't have been tearing him up the same way. But like, so that, and then it was like an eye-opening experience to me. And I completely admit this is really my fault because, man, did I get out over my skis on like, if we take this thing over, we'll run it well. And I really underestimated the challenge that would be. But the thing is, once you realize that, like, oh, we can't get any of those people to run, because why would any of them? All the people who you'd want to run, let me tell you something they all have in common. Whether you're talking about Ron Paul or Judge Napolitano or Tom Woods or, you know, like whoever it might be, Spike Cohen, you know, whoever it might be, let me tell you one thing all of those people have in common. They have really nice lives. Like, they're very successful. They got money, they got wives, they got kids, they got like a lot of things going on. And it's like, why the fuck would they jeopardize all of that to try to lead a movement of people, half of whom won't even be grateful for it? You know, like, that was a real wake-up call to me. And, you know, ultimately what we ended up going with, it was like, oh, geez, thank God Chase won. You know, like that was like, what was the best case scenario?
Words you never thought you'd be saying.
Yeah. But so once I'm at a point where I'm going, thank God Chase won, then obviously, yes, there was a big screw up in my calculation of all of this. And I've never shied away from taking the full responsibility for that. But again, I learned that through the process. But so you could say, oh, hey, you know, at first you were saying you're going to run, you're going to get up there, you're going to say Ron Paul shit, we're going to do Ron Paul revolution shit, and that's going to like wake up, that's going to spark the minds of all these people. But and you could frame that as like, you used to be a radical and now you're a pragmatist or something. But the truth is, like, as I said before, I was always fucking a radical who believed in being pragmatic. I mean, I don't know, I'm still the same thing. What happened is that after it became clear that there was no viable option where this was going to spark a Ron Paul revolution, like, we just didn't have the candidate who was even potentially capable of doing that. And that's just the truth. Like, there just simply was not one candidate. I don't mean this is a shot to any of the other guys. There were some good guys and some not so good guys who ran. But like, fucking, you know, I like Josh Smith. Like, he's a good dude, you know, like, and he's a good libertarian. I'm not like trashing him. I'm not like taking shots at any of the other guys. The fact is, there was no one there who had any chance of like creating some big moment out of running
Yeah.
the party. But then there were these other options that previously were like unforeseeable, that had presented themselves. And it was like, I don't know, at the time I felt like, well, we'd be crazy to not at least think about this. You know, like, I mean, it's like, if we had at one point, it was before October 7th, there was one point where Bobby Kennedy really wanted the nomination. And, I kind of had that attitude. And this is before October 7th. So this is before he was really bad on the Israel stuff. But I was kind of like, well, fuck, god damn. I mean, how do we not at least consider this? Because this changes everything. And yes, it's not exactly what we planned. It's not a pure libertarian at all, but he is a guy who's at least running on being great on COVID and great on Ukraine, which were like the two big crises at the time. And then he's even talking shit about the CIA and the surveillance state and the neocons and this. And you're like, shit, dude, a famous millionaire from political royalty who's really good on the top few issues and maybe would get a lot of interest generated in the. I mean, I just think at that point, like, just as an adult, you'd be crazy to not at least consider that possibility. Then October 7th happened. It was like, oh, forget it. He's out. He's
then
too horrible.
Then the pause heard around the world happened.
The pause heard around the world, the longest pregnant pause in pregnant pause history. And so then, like after that, the first time Angela called me and told me that that she had been to Mar-a-Lago and that Trump was coming to speak at the convention, I was in disbelief. Like, I just could not believe that was real. Like, what the fuck are you telling me? And she swore me to secrecy before she told me, which was a good life lesson to me, to never make that agreement. So he goes, I'm going to tell you something, but you can't tell. And I went, okay. And then she told me, and I was like, okay, fuck. Now I swear I wouldn't tell. And I did. I'll reveal that. I did tell Scott and Michael Heiss. And I'm sorry for betraying your confidence, Angela, but I just like at that point I was like, yo, I can't not tell the guys I started this with that, like, this is what the person who we put in the spot wants to do. And holy shit, this sure is different than what the fuck we thought we were going to do. But also, hey, I can't really blame her for at least like, Angela was also drowning at the time, largely because of me. And so what was I going to tell her? That you shouldn't go pursue this option? Now, I do think that she and maybe some people around her, I think they might have flown a little too close to the sun. And then it's real easy to start rationalizing to yourself how the political calculation here is just to support the administration. And like, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm the guy calling for his impeachment and on national shows and shit. So like, again, with all of this stuff, I think and I guess maybe this is part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this, is that the stuff with Zulu, and like, we could do that debate if he wants to. The stuff with him, it's almost become too, it's like too disrespectful to where that's how that's gonna go. But like, we could do that if we want to, but that's how it's gonna go. It's gonna be like that. And I don't know. I guess like my heart's just not really in that anymore. Like, this has gotten enough attention and I'm talking about it on a show. So I guess, sure, I'll do the debate now. But it's just like, I don't know. People be like, well, you debate Archie Flower, you'll debate like these guys. It's like, yeah, because we were trying to do a thing. We were trying to do a big thing, and that was part of the project. And I thought it was part of the thing. There's no thing now. Like, there's no, I don't know. I don't care. Okay, you have the movement. Whatever the movement is, once you cut me, Ron Paul, Hoppe, Tom Woods, Scott Horton, the Libertarian Institute, the Mises Institute, like, once you cut all of us out of it, whatever, and Cato Reason, I'm sure are no good too. Whatever left that's there, if you call that a move, okay, it's yours. You have it. But I guess the point is that with all these things, I think actually like a good faith conversation about this would probably be more productive than like a death sport who's going to take out
right
who.
Exactly. And that's what
but in the good faith conversation, I think most of you guys might realize, like the critics, like, okay, it's easy to criticize. Again, it's always easier to be out of the arena. It's always easier to backseat drive, but it's not that none of it was wrong. It's just that it's more complicated than you might think it was. And we were real people in a real situation having to make real decisions about what to do next.
No, I 100% agree.
And we got Ross free. I mean, I don't know. We got something for it. Yeah, we got,
I agree, and Bobby Kennedy being in there is interesting. It's not libertarian, but in some sense, it's kind of fun watching him make some people squirm and get upset at some of the things he does. But I think that, I mean, first of all, I remember when I found out that it was happening, which was probably close to the time you found out, maybe a little bit later, and I was like, So what, are we just doing what everyone said we were gonna do all along? That we were gonna, like, support Trump?
Yeah,
This is a joke." But, like, I can understand why some people maybe who were, like, the super critics then kind of, like, do this historical revisionism of, like, what we did, and they're like, "That was the plan all along," and I'm like, "If
yeah.
that was the plan all along, then it was, like, man, one of the most eloquent, like, sophisticated heists ever pulled off on, like, multiple people, on you,
Yeah,
on
I mean,
Scott,
I was
on
in the
me."
dark
Yeah.
if that was the plan all along.
Yeah, I was like, "Dude," I went to Michael Heiss's wedding, like, I'm the one who married him and his wife, like, let me tell you something, it was like, Heiss is, like, a brilliant political mind in a lot of ways. I was
Yeah.
like, but he's not that, like, conniving or
Well,
anything to,
I
like,
also think
run
like
this long con to be like, I'm gonna, like, like, in 2018, he's like, "I'm gonna get Donald Trump to come to our
yeah,
convention
I
in
mean, look,
2025."
all that stuff's just goofy, and the idea that we even possibly could have coordinated that would happen
Yeah,
is,
no, it's
like, pretty
crazy.
insane. But also, like, dude, that I mean, it should be brought up just because Michael Hayes got mentioned that I just, like, I'm fine. Blame me for all you want to for the shit, but man, did Michael Ice just take a ridiculous amount of shit for doing absolutely nothing wrong, man? For being like the most passionate, the most committed activist in libertarianism that I've ever seen, who I've ever been around. The guy literally was working for peanuts to try to make this thing happen. He started the whole thing by himself before he had any of us on board. And he worked tirelessly for years and years and years. And like took real arrows, like took like all types of vicious attacks and smears, really sacrificed, like I wasn't in the situation that Michael Heiss was in. I was like, oh, I mean, I wasn't as successful as I am now or anywhere close to it when we were starting, but I was already like, I was making good money in an independent lane where I was like, I got to do all the fun stuff. I got to have the biggest audience, then give the headline keynote speech, and then have all the people want to take pictures with me afterward. Like my job was cushy in a way through this whole thing. Whereas Michael was a guy who's like banging out like 30K a year with his side hustle and the Mises pack for the first like 3 years of it. Like maybe got up to doubling that at some point or something, but like was really and was getting like articles written about him, like things like, oh, you'll never be able to have a real job with a wife and planning on starting a family, like fucking put everything on the line for hardcore libertarians. And then to see the way he was just utterly betrayed by so many of these people. Like, I can't tell you this, and this is part of the reason why, because it's more so about him than it is about me, but it's part of the reason why I was like snappy with Jose Gallison, where he goes like, oh, if Dave doesn't respond to Zulu, he takes the L. And I was like, what L do I take? What L do I take if I never talk to any of you ever again? What do you even like? What do we actually mean by this here? What L do I take? In fact, I probably take an L by talking about this. The only W would be for me to just ignore this. My wife told me the other day, I was trending on Twitter for 10 straight days as all this shit was going on, having nothing to do with any of this shit. Like there was nothing there that like, oh, he needs to address this. It's just like, I kind of give a shit about this. But I gotta say, like, people like formulate people who sit and didn't like contribute or attempt to any of this, which like fine, I don't care, like that's okay. No one was saying you had to join the Libertarian Party or the Mises Caucus for that matter, but like I watch people who didn't like ever lift a finger for any of this sit there and go, here's what it is, they sold out. They used to be radical and now they're pragmatic. When like Michael Heiss would be like, hey, New Hampshire, could you guys just not scream black people? Like, would that be okay? Like, we
Right.
just launched this whole thing. If you could just not do that, and then a bunch of people be like, whoa, oh, so much for a decentralized revolution. I guess now we want central. And like, again, it's like this shit is just so dumb, dude. And this does get to like kind of the point that a lot of us have been making for a lot of years here. It's like, guys, if you ever want to do anything here, there's got to be like a baseline of like decency to your people who are trying to do something for you, a little bit of loyalty. I'm not saying loyalty like I don't give a shit, dude. I know you've heard every goddamn one of my arguments about immigration. I've made them on your show to you many times, and you still come away going like, I don't really agree with Dave on it. Like, okay, whatever. You supported Josh Smith, and when I was supporting Michael Rechtenwald, tell me, Jacob, was that weird for 1 second in our relationship ever? You know, Jose Gallison never joined the party or the caucus or anything. Like, I don't know. I don't care about that. We could have a million disagreements, you know, but it's like, just like, don't betray people. Like, have like at
Yeah.
least a little bit of like, okay, there, you know, like it just seems to me, and like I guess that was kind of like my like part of the thing that bugged me about the whole thing was it was like, guys, you got people out there like taking arrows for you, like real arrows, like in this moment when I'm just, I mean, dude, I'm getting it from all ends of the spectrum. I mean, arrows flying from every camp you could imagine. And like in that moment, you'd go like, let's try to take him down. Like, let's not like at least kind of have his back. And again, I don't really give a shit about me because it doesn't matter if any of you guys have my back, to be quite honest. But like I do when I think about it with Michael Heist, it's just like, I don't know, man. It's like a very similar thing to like where I said like how we'll never be able to get someone to run for president. We'll never be able to get like someone good to do this. Is because fucking half the shit is you're going to be torn apart by your own people for like for not what biting the bullets of yes, pornography should be available in full view of kids, or you should sacrifice your kid before you steal. Like this is again, as I've said, it's fundamentally unserious, and you can't have a serious movement if that's how the people in it are going to behave. And so that's my thing, that ultimately, like, whoever you want to blame, put the blame on me, that's fine. But the reason why I'm not very big on the Libertarian Party in general is because, you know, I just don't really see like the viable option there. I don't see, you know, after like kind of stepping back after 2024 and like all this stuff, they go, I see a very small political party that that has a very tiny group of members who seem to love, for the most part, nothing better than feeling good about themselves and bragging about who won the latest drama and who is a better person because they're more pure than the other one. And while I may have gotten into a lot of libertarian drama in the Mises Caucus takeover years, that was always only because I saw it connected to like this bigger thing. That like if we could take this thing, we could run the right person and we could have another Ron Paul revolution. Believe me, if it wasn't for that, I would not have been spending my time arguing with like state chairs of the, you know, local affiliate LPs. I just wouldn't have.
No, there's a lot there I agree with, and I think that, like, I there's this unfortunate thing with the LP, which, like, makes me not completely stop paying attention to it, which is that it has the name libertarian in it, which is kind of like this albatross around our necks as libertarians, is that, like, which was half the reason I wanted the Mises Caucus to take over, was because when you looked at what the Libertarian Party looked like before the Mises Caucus with, you know, fat naked guy on the stage and
Yeah.
then being completely embarrassing during COVID, I was like, okay, I don't care the Libertarian Party never wins, but can they at least be just libertarian? Like, can they not like make the libertarian philosophy and ideas and people look like jokes? But you're completely right that there is this opportunity cost to trying to make the LP even just not embarrassing, let alone successful. And part of it is beyond, and listen, some of it is just the pitfalls of democracy, right? Both in the system we live in this country
Mm-hmm.
and that the LP is organized democratically. And so you're kind of fighting democracy on two fronts there. But then the other problem is a culture problem. And and to be honest, and I think you would agree with me, it was at least by the end, it was a culture problem in and out of the caucus. Because
Oh
even
yeah, 100%.
even towards the end, like the stuff going on with LPNH and the stuff going on even with
Well,
some of the guys in
a big,
Florida, and then it just
yeah,
it got crazy.
100%. A big wake up call to me was the thing that happened with Blake Masters. And that was something that really, it soured me on the whole project in a way that did, it certainly colored like my mood of the whole thing, because it was like, again, all the guys not in the arena could say however they feel or whatever they would have done, but I led this thing that succeeded in 22, and we took over the third biggest political party in the country, and it was a weird gamble that we all made together, where we went in on it and we were like, hey, I think we can do this. Actually, we could take this thing over. And this was, I mean, I was the height of fully planning on running for president. Like, I had made my decision, I was going to do this, and that was what was happening, and I was going to I was going to dedicate my life in these years of my life to leading this like cause. And I had totally staked my entire reputation on it already. I mean, I had made this, those years, like whatever, I know one of the guys who I don't want to mention again, but we were talking about before, we made these videos, say like his thing is that I was extracting value out of the Libertarian Party. Like, I led the Mises Caucus so I could go around and collect speaking fees, which, by the way,
yeah.
let me just say, if you, first of all, I'm not exaggerating, I probably make 20 times what my biggest speaking fee was per weekend right now. Like the idea that, also, by the way,
as a failed comedian,
the reason they paid me speaking fees was because they charged money for the tickets, and I had brought all of the people there. I was not extracting wealth out of the Libertarian Party. I was like I was going to state conventions for my flight plus $2,000 or something like that, and giving an hour speech. Like, it's just like the idea that I was like extracting wealth out of the Libertarian Party is like frankly absurd. I brought the people into the party. The reason why all those people wanted to see me speak at the events was because they were fans of my podcast from before, when I had done it's just, anyway, it's ridiculous. But I was going on, essentially what happened, right, was that during COVID, Joe Rogan decided that I was his guy. I had been on a couple times before, but he just loved everything I had to say about COVID so much that he just started having me on all the time. And Tim Pool and all these other guys started having me on. And I just wore the banner of the Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus whenever I went into any of these things. And so I like made this my identity. I went all in on this. Like, we're doing this thing. And it made a lot of sense. After the year 2020, again, at the time, hindsight is 2020, but this was in the year 2020. But after 2020 and the lockdowns, it was like, well, fuck the Republicans, and the Democrats are Joe Biden, so screw them too. And so obviously, hey, there's this third option. It was like it made sense to me that this is how we should sell the thing. And so then we win. We take over everything. We win every single position by super majorities, and the takeover is complete. And the Mises Caucus is now taking over the Libertarian Party. And immediately, like, the problems started to arise, and I was like, shit. Like, there was a whole thing that, like, I insisted on taking over the Twitter, but they wouldn't let me take over the Twitter. So they let me and a committee have the Twitter, but then the rest of the committee kept tweeting shit that was like not the right thing. And I was like, can't you, like, guys, haven't I just demonstrated I'm the best at doing this? So just let me do this. But then there's all this, and Angela's like, well, we have to have someone who's technically on the board. And then also we have to have this dumb chick from the previous administration on the Twitter thing too. And then she's tweeting anyway. But so then we get this Senate race. And in Arizona, we got Blake Masters, who was once an anarcho-capitalist, had written on LouRockwell.com, had written some of the most beautiful shit ever, was like a pure ANCAP. Then he had linked up with Peter Thiel and these guys and became like not an ANCAP anymore and more of a right-wing populist, but like someone who still privately told me that, like, dude, I still agree with everything Murray Rothbard said. I just think this is kind of like the wind and the direction we're going in. He told me the only thing I disagree with Murray Rothbard on is abortion, because it's literally the only thing I disagree with him on. And I was like, that's me too.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, that's not bad. Now, I don't know but then on the other side, you had Mark Kelly, like the worst Democrat in the country, or right up there with the worst. And then you had Mark Victor, the libertarian, who's polling more than the gap between the two of them. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, shit, dude, is the first thing that this organization that we just hijacked going to do keep out potentially one of the best senators in the country and give it to one of the worst Clinton Democrats. And then I came up with this fucking scheme where I was like, yo, I think we could get this guy to come kiss the ring of the libertarians, and then we drop out and support him. And this could be the biggest power move that the Libertarian Party's ever pulled off. Like, we actually changed the outcome to this. And he comes on my show, he comes on Ron Paul's show, he sits down with Mark Victor for like a 40-minute interview, giving all of us assurances about how libertarian he's going to be. So it's like, now it's like, not only did we play Kingmaker, but we got like assurances where, okay, maybe he doesn't come through on this, but we got you on record saying this. And I go,
Right.
ain't that pretty neat? Biggest power move the Libertarian Party's ever pulled off. And I got so much shit. And to your point of, it's not just outside the caucus, I got so much shit from within our caucus for that. And it's like, dude, now look, to be completely fair, it did not work out. Mark Victor dropped out. Blake Masters still ended up losing. But like, okay, at the time, the polling said it was a coin flip and he was the difference. Like, we went for it. So anytime you go for it, it doesn't work out. All right, you could say you were wrong, but I guess the point just being that,
but you weren't wrong. It just, you guys, it waited too long, because at that point, Mark couldn't actually drop out. He was still on the ballot.
Well, that's right.
That's right. That was the issue. If we had actually done it the right way.
Yes, there were other problems like that too. But also, so what had happened at that time was that I had just gone back on Rogan's podcast, and I had done this breakdown of the war in Ukraine, which was, I think, in its first few years, or no, I'm sorry, in the first few months. It was maybe like 6 months old at the time. And this video went super viral, like more viral than anything I had ever done at the time. The clip got like 10 million views on YouTube, and then it was all over Twitter and everything. And so it was like this big bump in like notoriety that I had gotten over being against this fucking war, like, which was like, against a nuclear power, like a proxy war on their border. And so I was like, oh shit, wow, look, dude, this is so set up perfectly, man. Like, we just took over the party. I have this huge moment right now. And then it's not just that Mises Caucus members disagreed with me about it, but the vicious attacks that I came under after that, where I was like, yo, like, but you guys you're acting like I sold my soul, because in this one moment, instead of just running a like, what was going to be achieved by me not doing this? Like, nothing. None of you even think anything. But like, and so anyway, I guess, yes, that did open my eyes a little bit to like there does become a level where, as much as a lot of these guys want to pretend that there's no difference between theory and strategy, like it's all one thing, but obviously there is a clear difference between those two. And if your level of purity or your level of ideological capture allows you to never be able to strategically do anything, then this is unworkable. Then like, then we're not a political party anymore. We really are just a book club, or, whatever. And so like, that was a big eye-opening thing to me. That really did. I'm not like saying that's the reason why I didn't run or anything like that, but I thought that took a lot of the wind out of my sails. And like, I remember, I don't remember if you were on the meeting or not, but I remember
I didn't speak, but I remember that meeting. Yeah.
So Heist brought me into like this meeting of the Mises Caucus organizers from around the country. And it was like one after the other, just going off on how betrayed they were that I did this. And I'm just sitting there where I'm like in this position where it's like, guys, I'm coming into this like huge career. Like, I'm moving the needle on this major issue. And like, after all I've done to like, for this whole thing, this is now, like, I don't know, it just seems so crazy to me. It was like, so like, and I was just like, oh, this isn't serious. This isn't like a serious political project. If you're allergic to even that level of like maneuvering. And so, yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think the answer is that we should ever just like support Republicans or stop talking about the things we care about. And certainly the move isn't, if you throw Republicans your support, to not, as soon as they start violating, your principles, to not call them out for that. But the idea that like, we're supposed to just sit here and be pure angels and never engage in the real world, to me just seems like, obviously a losing strategy.
No, I think that's 100% correct. I think that if there's if there's anything to say from all of it, I guess, just to kind of, maybe to wrap it, because we're at 2.5 hours, and I know I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm sure both of our wives probably want us to get off and spend some time with them. But yeah, I think that, it's one of those things, like nothing risked, nothing gained. Like, I still think that uh there's a lot of lessons learned from that. And at the end of the day, like, it maybe it didn't. So, like, we now know the pitfalls of that strategy, right? So we know, like, I guess we learned what not to do, maybe. But I think that, I don't know, I would not sell yourself too short in terms of just like I know you wanna blame yourself and be like, "It was a failure, it was all my fault," and, like, I guess, yeah, it was a failure in terms of, like, it ran on very lofty promises, right? It ran on very, like, which was kinda like my thing that I was probably the most frustrated at, I'm sure you were too, was that, like, I kind of was thinking, "We're gonna take over, and we're gonna be like, we're not even like," even with, like, people in the middle who might seem reasonable and be like, "Eh, I don't know if we should really, like, give you guys all the control." I was like, "No, you don't understand. Once we're in control, we're gonna have all these people coming in, we're gonna have all this money, and it's just gonna be," and then just none of that materialized. I'm not
No,
even saying that
that's for sure. Look, I
yeah,
also thought you know, there was a feeling that for sure that once we took over the party, we would see an influx of people who were like, okay, now we're talking. And that just really didn't happen. And I think part of that was just that um my audience was only so big at the time. And we got the percentage of people who we were going to get were already on, had already come in. And then, and honestly, like Heis and Angela and some of those people could probably speak to this better than I can. But I do think there was a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation that those guys had, that I guess I, to some degree, had too. Although maybe I just never gave this the appropriate amount of thought. But I've made this comparison before on the phone with Michael Heiss when he's been explaining this to me. But one of the things is like when the Palestinian resistance like first embraced terrorism, like really started like it was like in the 50s when like the real hardcore like the maybe not the PLO but like the precursor to the PLO, like Yasser Arafat and those guys really got in, and they were like they were like borrowing, I know you know this history pretty well, but they were like borrowing a lot from the Algerian model, where Algerians had basically embraced terrorism to drive out the French. And they would have this constant cycle, which is not that far off from the cycle you see today in Israel, Palestine, where essentially they would do these like provocative terrorist attacks to get them to respond to them. And then when they'd slaughter a whole bunch of people, they'd read about it back home in the French newspapers, and French liberals would go, hey, je ne sais quoi, blah, 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 and be like all upset about the slaughtering people. And then eventually they drove the French out. And so they were like, hey, we're going to do this with the Jews, these European colonizers here in Palestine. But there was this fundamental like miscalculation that they made, which was that the Jews weren't the French. They weren't like a mother country back home who had some of its, forces out here in France. These were, settler colonialists or refugees or whatever you want to call them, but they were starting a new life here. And there was no Poland or Ukraine for them to go back home to. And that just wasn't going to happen. And in a similar sense, I think that there was a feeling amongst the Mises caucus that a lot of the old guard and the perennial haters would be gone after we took over. Whereas like there wasn't an understanding that like, no, this is these people's entire life, and they will dedicate everything they have to spoil your next thing. Like they'd rather burn the whole thing down than give you a fair shot and see if you can do something good with it or not. And that was, I think there's just no question that like, again, Mike and Angela would know more about this than me, but I do think that that was like a real force. That was something that we just did not account for. So, like I said, there's a long list of mistakes. Look, I feel like I said on the caucus floor when the last vote came in, or the second to last vote, like when it was clear Chase was going to win, before it was like Noda versus Chase or whatever, but like when it was clear that Chase had beat Rechtenwald, I remember saying Heiss and Rechtenwald, and to like our whole core group that was there. You might have been there with, or maybe you weren't there. I don't remember.
I wasn't there. My
You
wife
weren't there for
was.
that one.
My,
Yeah. Oh,
my,
that's
my
when you were
wife
having
was
a
like,
baby.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. No, that's okay. Good excuse. Um, but I said to all of them, I was like, guys, my only demand here is like all class. You know, like we won in Reno, we lost in DC, nothing but class as we leave this thing. Like let that. And I literally walked around the room. I forced myself to walk around the room to like by all the haters. Like I just crossed. I was the first one to shake Chase's hand and say congratulations. And then or one of the first ones. And then I walked around through the tables of all the haters and just let them all talk shit. Like let them like let me just walk through. I will take my lumps on this. Like I ran my victory laps in Reno, and I will take my defeat here. And then, of course, like half the guys who I said that to started blaming everybody else and why it's everyone else's fault and just whatever. And most embarrassingly, the guy at the top. But and blaming everything except the obvious thing that was completely his fuck up of the whole weekend. Like, you know,
Yeah.
anyway, just it was just horrible, just so cringy. Um, but look, I mean, I just feel like that's the attitude to have after a thing like this, especially when I was the leader in many ways of it, is like, no, this was on me. And the failure was on me. I mean, like I certainly like I never should have floated out the idea that hard unless I was 100% knew I was going to be able to do it. I gave, you know, like I planned on doing a whole thing and then backed out of it. And then all the people after I backed out of it were really up shit's creek and really, you know, like struggling. And there was no other plan. I mean, there just wasn't. It's not like, oh, they should have done this. There wasn't another option. Like this was what the whole thing was hinging on. And sure, you could say maybe it's a failed strategy if it's all hinging on one guy. But when you're that one guy and then you end up pulling out, it's pretty hard to not, as a man, look at that and go, yeah, that's on me. Like these guys were relying on me to do this, and ultimately I decided not to. Now, I don't regret that decision. I think it was the right decision in a lot of different ways, but I still did get a bunch of people to do a thing on the view that we were going to do this other thing and then pulled out of that. And so like, I think it's only right that I should look at that and go, yeah,
And fair,
hey,
yeah, and fair enough.
that's my fault.
And that speaks to your character and your integrity, and I understand that. I just think there's also something to learn here, which we can end on this. I'm sure you'll agree that, like, as much as I value libertarianism, I mean, like, I work for the Libertarian Christian Institute, right? So, like, I've
Yeah.
I've made my name of my podcast is Biblical Anarchy. Like, I decided my whole strategy is just like, whatever, I'm gonna wear this stuff on my sleeve and just force the conversation because that's just what I prefer to do. But even on my podcast and in my conversations with people I know, I'm always telling people, you know, I think libertarianism is a beautiful philosophy, but it's kind of more like a tool. It's something I use to evaluate like conflicts in the world and economics and to kind of like make sense and figure out like who's in the right, who's in the wrong and things like that. But the tool is only as good as the culture of the people that are using it. And I think what we've learned through all of this in the LP and Liberty movement is that doesn't like you have a whole group of people who believe in liberty and yet their culture as we've described is quite toxic and quite divisive. And this is why I just think as a Christian that like what's going to save our country, what's going to rescue the republic, all these slogans we have, it, liberty is important, don't get me wrong, but I think that this does ultimately, at least to some extent, reflect the heart of a nation that's kind of walked away from God and that's
Yeah.
embraced secular values, that's embraced all these false idols, including sometimes making libertarianism an idol. And so part of what I love about you, even though you're not a Christian yet, we're working on that. You know, do I get? I think Ben Shapiro said that like someone gets like 1 million heaven points if they convert them. So like, are you worth like 2 million or something because
I
you don't
got,
support genocide? I mean, I don't know. But
yeah, that's a
uh
good point.
but directionally, you're saying this, you're doing the thing that I'm talking about, which is that although you are talking about liberty and you do talk about economics, you talk about philosophy, but you're also just kind of appealing to like our better angels and like pushing to the fact that like there's something broken in the culture. Like there's something that drives people to look at what's going on in Gaza and be completely callous to it. And part of that's philosophy. but it's not 100%
Yeah.
philosophy. It's religion, it's ideology, it's a broken, I mean, heck, just like the entire history of Gaza and Israel is like a history in, like, not just what violence breeds, but then what ideology breeds as
Yeah.
well. So, I think that's something that we have to, so you can say this was my fault and all that, but I think there's a deeper problem that's underlying all of this, which as much as my podcast is about trying to preach liberty to to Christians and to normal people, it's also about trying to, to everyone, and maybe sometimes especially libertarians, to say like why things like, even if you're not I know you're one of those people who's like, even though you're not a Christian, you believe that Christianity matters so much to the West and to liberty and to the values we hold dear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it goes back. I mean, part of it is like my personal relationship with God, but part of it is also just having a bit of humility and going like, all right, I mean, if you are a libertarian, like, is it are you so comfortable with saying it's a complete coincidence that the concept of individual liberty has only ever arisen in Christendom? Like, that seems like a pretty wild assumption to make, like, or the idea that you'd go, hey, yes, I understand that the concept of individual rights and natural rights and restrained government and the entire enlightenment, or, even going back to like the Magna Carta, or like, so, like, it's like, am I so like self-assured in my own understanding of everything that I'd go, you could remove the Christianity from that and still have the liberty, no problem. Like, I don't know. That seems like a wild take to have. And there obviously are so many themes in Christianity, which truly, in a somewhat unique sense, that line up with the idea of individual liberty, with like the whole, goddamn central story of it being like an individual who's wrongly persecuted. And like, it's just like there's just a lot there that clearly is very close to what we think. But I think that more onto like the stuff I said before, that I don't think, the Libertarian Party has these people who are, like, I mean, specifically, I could think of people who are like, I don't know, in their maybe 60s, 50s, 60s, maybe even 70, who don't have any children, have like a crazy life themselves, need to fundraise in order to get to the next convention, but lecture everybody about their moral superiority all day long on social media.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Ah, I'm sorry, there's something missing there, man. And you're filling a really big void with libertarianism. And like,
Yes.
even when you're like, if you describe like losing a volunteer position on the LNC as your life being destroyed, like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, that's a real problem. And the thing is that clearly, like, there's a big hole there. There's something missing. And there's something much more important than libertarianism. I mean, like, look, dude, let's just say hypothetically, we're in a libertarian society tomorrow. It's no more, everything's private property. There's no more fucking, governments. Is that it? Is there not more to life than that? Is there not, would there then
Yeah.
not be a problem, right? Like, wouldn't
Yeah.
there still be all of these lofty things that we cared about? Like, whether you're a good person, whether you're a good husband, whether you're a good father, whether you're a part of your community, like, what would you feel proud about? I mean, I don't know. I think you feel proud about like the people who you help build up and the people you support and what you do to make everybody else's life a little better. Okay, well, even when a government exists, all that stuff still really matters. Like, all that stuff still really matters. And sometimes it matters even more than that, Like
Yeah.
sometimes like it's more important that you're a loyal friend than that you're like, get a perfect non-aggression principle score in your head. Like, I just, and I think that is, obviously, like, as you said, if I'm talking to a room of like statists, then yeah, I'm going to probably focus on how you guys need to understand libertarianism. But if I'm talking to a room of libertarians where I see this problem, it's like, yeah, my focus is kind of going to be on like, hey guys, there's actually other like competing values here and all. And look, I do, and this will be the last thing I say, but I do think that there's a lot of great things about the philosophy of libertarianism. I've said for many, many years, I think it's given me superpowers. Like, I don't think I'm the smartest libertarian, despite what some people may claim. I've never like said I'm the biggest expert on libertarianism. I have said that I understand the 101 of it, and that if you're bringing the 101 at me and thinking you stumped me, probably I've thought about that already. But you know, in any room of libertarians, I'm not necessarily in like the smartest percentage of that room. And in fact, in lots of rooms of libertarians, I'm in the lower percentage of intelligence. But I just think that there's a lot of beautiful things about the theory. It like I said, it's given me superpowers. Part of the reason why I'm so good at what I do is because I've read Rothbard and Hoppe and Mises, and it gives you a different
Yes.
angle to cut
Yeah.
through all this stuff and like have an insight that most of the political commentators are missing, because it's like, yeah, but you guys don't see this thing. Like, you know, all these Democrats are winning on the unaffordability crisis. Well, what is an unaffordability crisis now? Does anyone else even know except us? Like, oh,
Yeah.
currency debasement. Oh, that's what unaffordability means, right? Like, so there's a lot of things like that. But at the same time, one of the real negative things about libertarianism is that you like, after going through the 101 class, let's say you're a libertarian for 6 months who's really interested about this stuff, so you're reading all libertarian theory. After about 6 months of it, you kind of have this feeling, which I remember having in my 20s. You kind of have this feeling of like, I understand it all. I got the answer to every single thing. I have the answer
Yep.
to every single political problem that ails our people. And what's the answer? Privatize it. Non-aggression principle, you know, like it. And well, look, by the way, that is kind of still correct, right? Like, yes, it is true that you kind of do. There is something that is dangerously intoxicating about giving people the impression that you have the answer to everything, that you understand everything. That is not the attitude that guys in their 20s should have. You have so goddamn much to learn, dude. Like, it is just, it's the world is infinitely more complex than you think it is. And there's like, it would behoove libertarians to understand that like there are these critical insights that you have, and you want to spread that message to as many people as you can in the most compelling way. But it would also like behoove libertarians to understand that the world is very, very complicated, and that your legal theory does not replace all of these other things. And if you elevate your legal theory to being your ideology, which for an atheist essentially means your religion, you're going to get things horribly wrong. And I also just don't think you're going to move the needle.
Yeah. No, 100% agree. Dave, I appreciate you coming on, and covered a lot of ground here tonight.
Yeah.
You let me know. I mean, I will gladly host a debate if you want to do it. But I mean, my encouragement would be like, if you do it, and I told Zulu this too, like, I just think everyone would enjoy it more if it was a good faith dialogue rather than blood sports and all that. But like, you know, I think like
That's
you
going to
said,
be tough. That's going to be
I
tough at
know,
this point. But if you
I
want to
know,
say, look, like just make it clear what the debate challenge is, and then the audience
yeah.
can tell me whether they think it's clear. But is the debate really? Because again, I didn't watch the whole video, and I'm just going based off what I read, the quote in Adam Heyman's piece. But if the debate is, I'll bite all those bullets, we're really setting up the debate to be, I'd kill to protect my children, and you wouldn't steal a penny. Like,
And I
all
just feel,
right.
yeah. See, like
All
my
right. If that's the debate topic, like, you want to do this? Because I just don't listen. All I'm saying is I know it's real easy, dude. I know when you guys think I'm up on my perch and you're down here taking, so you could tear me apart and all this. I'm not bad at what I do. And like, I'm really not sure that you want to do that as much as you think you want to. You might just want to cut your losses here. Like, if you really want to have that debate, okay. But I actually don't even know. Just the debate, that if that is the debate, just that on its face is like already so ridiculous, it's hard to take seriously. But that with the element of being wildly disrespectful to me, I just don't see where that goes, other than, you know, an
not like
Archie flowering of sorts.
now Monhop's in the chat, and I'll throw those up here. If this was the debate topic, that it's what's the strategy for libertarianism, I think that'd be a much
But
more like
also
interesting debate.
but that's also not a debate topic. So if like formulate a debate topic there, Monhop, because you can't go. We're debating strategy, like, but okay,
Well, I
but
mean, you could
what?
say like what is you know, what's the
Okay,
correct
but then it just
strategy
comes back
for.
to the strategy is that I should tell everybody you can't save your children if it
Well,
requires
maybe,
stealing a
maybe.
penny. Like, okay, so that's still the same debate. What's your issue with my strategy is that I won't bite those bullets.
You're right.
Like,
It would still
you
probably
know,
reduce down to that. By the way,
it's still the debate.
I think Monhop is aware that his name is a contradiction. I think it's one of those weird ironic things, but because I
No,
know
I
you
don't
were, you know,
understand these kids.
dude, my kids. I don't know if we. How old are your? I forget how old your kids are. My kids like, and we don't let them watch a lot of like stuff on YouTube and whatnot. But the little they do, they come away with like they make these weird voices and play these weird games. I'm just like, what is that? Just like I don't know, the young kid. I sound old now. It's like I'm only
Oh no, you do.
33, but it's just like I finally hit that age where like the young people humor. It's just like,
Yeah. Well, the kids age fast.
yep. Dave, thank you for being on. Thank you everyone
Absolutely, dude.
for
Thank you
being
for
here.
having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks to everyone. Make sure you like this video so more people get to see it. And I'll be back. This was completely impromptu. I'm usually here live every Monday night, so I'll be back here again next Monday. And make sure, and Dave, just keep up the good work, man. I mean, you really are. And like, I think I've been trying to hold back the fanboying, as you know, but like seriously, dude, like you are out there killing it. Like you're
No,
out
well,
there going
thank
all
you.
these big platforms, and like you know what? Like sometimes you just do such a good job, you make it look easy, and maybe we take you a little bit for granted. So, but I appreciate what you're doing, and I certainly hope that more libertarians can appreciate that as well. But thanks everyone for being here. We're going to sign off now. Talk to you next time.